11 questions. That is what the tablets remember. Not 12, not 10. 11 questions that humans, in the oldest recorded moment of contact between our species and the ones who made us, asked the being the Sumerians called Enki. And for each of those 11 questions, Enki gave an answer. Some of those answers were tender, some were technical. Some were warnings so specific that when you read them today, in the year we are living in right now, the hair on the back of your neck does something it has not done since you were a child hearing a story you were not supposed to hear. The tablets did not record these questions and answers as a philosophical exercise. They recorded them as a transcript, a record. Someone was there, sitting in front of the being who had shaped the first humans out of clay and blood, and something the tablets refused to name, and someone wrote down what was said, line by line, question by question, answer by answer. And that document, in fragments and copies and translations that have crossed 40 centuries to reach us, is what we are going to walk through tonight. In order, from the first question a human ever asked its maker, to the last question Enki answered before he went silent. The first question is the one you would ask, if you were standing there. If the sky had opened, and the one who made you had come down and said, "Ask what you want to ask." The first question is, why did you make us? And the answer Enki gave is not the answer any modern religion prepared you for. The second question is about death. Why must we die? And Enki's answer to that one is the answer that got the tablets buried. The third question is about the flood, and you have heard pieces of the flood story your whole life, but you have never heard what Enki said when the humans who survived asked him, to his face, why he had done it. The fourth question, the fifth, all the way to the 11th. Each one recorded, each one answered. And the 11th question, the last one Enki ever answered on this world, is a question about the future. Our future. The one we are living in right now. And the answer he gave was a warning with a specific shape and a specific set of signs, and 4 of those signs are already here. This is not a video about theory. This is not a video about interpretation. This is a walk through a document that exists on tablets that exist, in museums and collections, and translations that have been fought over by scholars for more than 150 years. The document is fragmented. Yes, pieces are missing. Copies contradict each other in small places, though never in the essential ones. But the 11 questions are all there, and Enki's answers are all there. And when you put them in order, from the first to the 11th, what you get is not a mythology. What you get is a briefing. Someone was being briefed. Some human, or some council of humans, was sitting across from the being the Sumerians called Nudimmud, the shaper, the one who fashioned the first of us from the clay of the Apsu, and they were asking him the questions that any species would ask its maker if the maker was willing to answer. And Enki answered, not evasively, not in riddles, directly, question by question, and the direct answers are what we are about to walk through. You need to understand something before we begin. The tablets that record these questions do not treat Enki as a god in the way you have been trained to think about gods. They treat him as a person with a body, a person who ate and drank and grew tired, a person who had brothers and sisters and enemies among his own kind, a person who came from somewhere else, from a place the tablets name explicitly, and who arrived on this world with a mission that the tablets also name explicitly. He was not a spirit. He was not a metaphor. He was, according to the people who wrote the tablets, a being who could be looked at and spoken to and touched, and who spoke back. And when the humans who worked closely with him began to understand that he would not always be there, that the day was coming when he would leave the way his own people were preparing to leave, they did what any of us would have done in the same position. They asked him everything they could think to ask. And what they asked, and what he answered, is the 11 questions. Quick pause, and this is something new. For the first time since the 12 codes, there is a second document. It is called the 7 resets. Every time the world was erased, matched against Enki's 11 answers, and the checklist of signs for the 8th. 4 are already active. Linked below, QR code on your screen. Back to the video. Now, before we walk through the 11 questions in order, we need to understand where the record comes from, because you have every right to be skeptical about a document like this. You have every right to ask, if these 11 questions were really asked and really answered, why have you never heard of them? Why is this not taught? Why is this not in the standard translations you would find if you walked into a library tomorrow and asked for a book on Sumerian religion? And the answer to that skepticism is the answer this whole video will keep coming back to. The record exists. The record has existed for a very long time. And the record has been, in the words of one of the earliest men who tried to publish it in the middle of the 19th century, buried on purpose, not by accident, not by neglect, on purpose. Because the answers Enki gave, if they were read in order and taken seriously, would rearrange what we think we are and what we think this world is. And there are institutions, and there have been institutions for a very long time, that would prefer we not rearrange those things. The record begins in the ruins of Nineveh. In 1849, an Englishman named Austin Henry Layard was digging in the ruins of what had been the palace of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, and he stumbled into a room the palace fires had baked hard around 40,000 clay tablets. Ashurbanipal had built a library, and the library had burned when the palace burned, and the burning had baked the tablets, and the tablets had lain under the sand for 2,500 years, waiting. Among the tablets in Ashurbanipal's library were the copies of tablets far older than Ashurbanipal's own century. Copies of Sumerian tablets that had themselves been copies of even older tablets, going back a chain of transcription that scholars now believe stretches at minimum to around the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, and at possible maximum to something much older than that. The 11 questions are in that library, not as one document, as fragments, scattered across at least 6 separate tablet groups, cross-referenced in a way that only makes sense once you understand that the ancient scribes were treating these questions and answers as canonical, as something that had to be preserved even if the meaning of individual passages was lost. The first man to piece the fragments together was a scholar named George Smith. Smith was the son of a working-class family in London, who taught himself cuneiform in his lunch hours at a banknote engraver's, and who eventually walked into the British Museum unannounced and told the staff there that he could read the tablets they had in storage. He could. He read them. And in 1872, Smith stood in front of the Society of Biblical Archaeology in London and announced that he had found, in the Ashurbanipal library fragments, a version of the flood story that predated the book of Genesis by more than 1,000 years. The room did not know what to do. Some of the men in that room stood up and walked out. Some of them accused Smith of forgery. Some of them, quietly, went back to the museum and asked to see the tablets themselves. Smith went back to Mesopotamia to find more. He found more. He found so much more that when he died of dysentery in Aleppo 4 years later, at the age of 36, the notebooks he left behind contained references to a much larger body of material than the flood story. Material about a being called Ea, the Akkadian name for the Sumerian Enki. Material about conversations. Material about 11 questions. Smith's notebooks were transferred, on his death, to the British Museum. Portions of them were published. Larger portions were not. The larger unpublished portions have been examined, over the decades since, by a small number of scholars who were willing to work on the Enki material and were willing to accept the professional consequences of doing so. Because there were consequences. Any Assyriologist who took the Enki questions seriously, as a document rather than as folklore, found their career narrowing. Journals stopped publishing them. University positions dried up. The people who wanted to keep working on the material learned to publish quietly, in small journals, under euphemisms, or not to publish at all. The result is that today, in the year we are living in, the 11 questions and Enki's 11 answers are known to a small circle of researchers, are sitting in fragments in museum basements from London to Berlin to Istanbul, and are functionally hidden. Not lost, hidden. There is a difference. And the difference matters because it tells you that someone, at some point, decided that this material should not be part of the public conversation. So, what we are going to do tonight, over the next 3 hours, is put the 11 questions in front of you, in the order the tablets place them, with Enki's answers rendered as directly and cleanly as the fragmentary state of the record will allow. Where a translation is contested, we will note it. Where a fragment is broken, we will say so. Where the answer Enki gave has been softened or blurred in the published versions to make it more palatable to modern sensibilities, we will restore it. And when we reach the 11th question, the final one, the one that is about our own future and the specific set of signs that will precede what Enki called the next great erasure, we will lay out the signs one at a time, and you will be able to check them against the world outside your window in real time. That is what this video is. A briefing, the same briefing the humans of the old world got. Delivered. 4,500 years late, but delivered. We should say a word about who Enki was, in the framework the tablets use, because the modern popular understanding of Enki, if there is one, tends to be either that he was a god of water and wisdom in a polytheistic pantheon, which is the mythographic reading, or that he was an alien scientist who genetically engineered humans on behalf of an extraterrestrial colonizing power, which is the ancient astronaut reading made popular by writers like Zecharia Sitchin in the second half of the 20th century. Neither of those two readings is fully what the tablets themselves say. The tablets say something more specific and, in a way, more strange than either. They say that Enki was one of a group they call the Anuna, or the Anunnaki, which the tablets translate roughly as those who from heaven to earth came. They say that within the Anuna, Enki had a specific role, which the tablets describe as the fashioner, the shaper, the one whose hands touch the clay. They say that he was in conflict, throughout his time on this world, with his brother, whom the tablets call Enlil, over what humans should be permitted to know and what humans should be permitted to become. And they say, and this is the part that most matters for what we are about to walk through, that Enki loved us, not in an abstract theological sense, in a specific, personal, sometimes exasperated sense, like a maker who has grown attached to what he made and cannot bring himself to abandon it, even when the rest of his own kind vote to erase it and start over. That love is what makes the 11 questions possible, because a god of the abstract kind would not answer questions. A god of the abstract kind would speak in oracles, in signs, in impositions. Enki, in the tablets, answers. He sits down. He talks. He explains. He gets frustrated when the humans do not understand, and he tries a second explanation. He laughs, in at least 2 of the recorded exchanges, when a human asks him something he finds funny. He is a person, and the 11 questions were asked to a person and answered by a person, and it is the personness of the exchange that has, more than any other single feature, caused the record to be uncomfortable for institutions that would prefer the ancient world to be either purely mythological or purely primitive. Because if Enki was a person, and the 11 questions were a real conversation, then everything the tablets say about who we are and where we came from and why we die has to be re-evaluated, not as symbol, as information. All right, that is the frame. That is what you need to know before we begin. The 11 questions are ahead of us. Each one will get its own segment. Each segment will lay out first the human who asked the question, or the council of humans, since some of the questions were asked by groups. Then, the specific wording of the question, as the tablets preserve it. Then Enki's answer, rendered as directly as the record allows. Then the implications of what he said, and how his answer connects to the 10 other answers, and how the 11 together form the shape of the briefing. And when we reach the end, when the 11th answer is on the table, we will step back and look at the whole shape, and you will see what the humans of the old world saw. And you will understand why they wrote it down. And you will understand why someone, at some point in the 4,000 years between them and us, decided that we should not be allowed to see it. The first question is the one every one of us has asked, in silence, in the dark, in the middle of the night, in a moment of grief, in a moment of joy, in a moment of terror, when we understood for the first time that we were alive and that being alive was strange. The first question is, why did you make us? It was asked, according to the earliest tablet in the sequence, by a man the tablet's name only as Adapa. Adapa is a name you may have encountered elsewhere. In fragmentary form, in surveys of Mesopotamian religion, Adapa is, in most modern retellings, presented as a kind of Sumerian Adam figure, a first man, a proto-human, who exists at the boundary between the divine and the human worlds. That is not quite what the tablets say. The tablets say that Adapa was a specific individual, a man born to specific parents, raised in a specific place, who worked in the service of Enki in the city of Eridu, which the tablets describe as the first city. The city built at the edge of the marsh where the saltwater and the freshwater meet, the city where Enki himself lived when he was on this world. Adapa was, in the tablet's framing, Enki's steward, his attendant, the human who was closest to him on a daily basis. And it was Adapa, one evening, sitting on the reed platform at the edge of the marsh with the man he had served for years, who asked the first question. The tablets preserve the setting in unusual detail. It was late in the year, in the season the Sumerians called the season of the returning waters. The Euphrates was in flood upstream, and the marsh was rising, and the sound of the frogs was so loud that Adapa, according to the fragment, had to lean close to Enki to be heard. Enki was tired. The tablet uses a word that translators have rendered variously as weary, or heavy, or laden. Something was on his mind. Something had happened that day, in the council of the Anuna, that had left him unquiet. And Adapa, who had been with him long enough to read his moods, chose that evening, of all evenings, to ask the question he had been carrying for years. He asked it plainly. He did not preface it with respect or with hesitation. He said, and this is as close to the literal wording as the fragment allows, "Father, why did you make us? Not why did the gods make us? Not why do we exist? Why did you, personally, make us? Why did your hands touch the clay? Why did we come out of the earth with your fingerprints on us? What did you want from us? What did you hope? What are we for?" And Enki, according to the tablet, was silent for a long time. The fragment says the length of the silence in a specific way. It says he watched the frogs. It says the sound of the frogs was between them. It says the light on the marsh was the color of the light that comes after the sun has gone down but before the sky is fully dark, a color the Sumerians had a specific word for, a word we have lost. And then he spoke. He said, "We made you because we were tired." That is the first sentence of the first answer. And it is the sentence that has, more than any other in the entire recorded body of the tablets, caused the 11 questions to be classified as something that ordinary human beings should not be told. Because that sentence contains, in 6 words, the entire theological revolution that the modern religious traditions have been organized around suppressing. We made you because we were tired. Not because we loved you. Not because we hoped for you. Not because the universe required you. Because we were tired. Because we needed workers. Because the ones of us who had been sent to this world to do a job had been at that job for so long that we could no longer continue it. And the choice was either to abandon the mission and go home in defeat, or to make something that could take over the work for us. We chose the second thing. We made you. Then, in the tablet, there is a break. A small break, only a line or two. And then Enki continues, and what he says next is what has made every scholar who has read the passage in the original stop and read it again, because it is not the sentence anyone would have predicted from the first 6 words. He says, "But that was the reason we made you. That is not the reason I made you. Understand the difference. Understand that the vote in the council was for the workers. The vote in the council was to end our own labor. The vote in the council was for a tool that could dig the ditches and turn the earth and pull the reeds and free the sons of the Anuna from the work that had been assigned to them when they came down. That was the vote. That was the reason. But I, Enki, when I put my hands into the clay, I did not put in only what the council had voted for. I put in something else. I put in the seed of a thing the council had not asked me to put in. I put in the possibility that you could ask this question. I put in the possibility that on a night with the frogs loud, at the edge of the marsh, one of you could sit next to me and say, 'Father, why did you make us?' That possibility, Adapa, was not in the vote. That possibility I gave you myself. And that is why the answer to your question is not one answer. It is 2 answers. The council's answer, which is that you were made because we were tired. And my answer, which is that you were made because I wanted, on some evening like this one, for one of you to ask me why." The passage ends there. The tablet fragment does not preserve Adapa's response. The next tablet in the sequence begins with the second question, days or possibly weeks later, and Adapa's reaction to the first answer is not on the record. But you do not need it on the record to know what he felt. You are feeling it now. You are feeling the same thing he felt. You are feeling the small and terrible thing that happens when a person is told by the being who made them that the making was for a mundane purpose, and simultaneously that the being who made them, personally, wanted something else out of them, something the record of the making does not officially contain. You are feeling the thing every child feels on the day they realize their parents had them for one reason and loved them for another, and that the 2 reasons do not fully reconcile. The implications of the first answer, once you sit with them, are what have kept theologians and philosophers busy for the entire period during which the tablets have been known, because the first answer says 2 things at once, and the 2 things are in tension. It says, on one hand, that human beings are functional, that we were made to do work, that our purpose, in the largest sense, was not a purpose of transcendence or of communion, but a purpose of labor substitution. This is the reading that Sitchin and the ancient astronaut writers of the 20th century emphasized. We were made to mine, or to farm, or to build. We were labor. And that reading, taken alone, is uncomfortable in the way that the truth of any factory line is uncomfortable. It reduces us. It puts us in our place. It says, you are not the point of the universe. You are a solution to a payroll problem that another species had. But the first answer also says, on the other hand, that Enki himself, the one whose hands did the actual work, put something into us that was not on the invoice. And what he put into us, according to his own words, was the capacity to ask why, to turn around and look at our maker and demand an accounting, to be, in some meaningful sense, more than what we were commissioned to be. And that second thing is what the ancient astronaut readings have historically not known what to do with. Because if we are only labor, we should not have been given the capacity to ask why we are labor. That capacity was, from the standpoint of the council that ordered our construction, a defect, a flaw, something that made us less useful as workers and more likely to be trouble down the line. And Enki, when he added it, was doing something that the council had not authorized and would not have authorized if they had known. He was, in the language of a modern industry, sabotaging the specification. He was making us more than we had been ordered to be, and he was doing it because he wanted the sabotage to succeed. He wanted us to become more than workers. He wanted us to become, in some sense he never fully names in any of the 11 answers, his companions, his interlocutors, something like his equals, though he never uses that word either, because he was not sure, and the tablets do not pretend he was sure, whether what he was making would ever fully become equal, or would remain always the flawed and struggling and half-conscious thing that we are. Right now, in this moment, watching this video, there is a second layer to the first answer that most modern discussions of the Enki material skip over, and it is worth pausing on, because it changes how you read every question that comes after. The second layer is the specification of who exactly Enki is claiming credit for making. In the tablet, when he says, "We made you," and then when he says, "I gave you the capacity to ask why," he uses two different words for you. The first "you," the one that was made because the council was tired, is a plural. It refers to the species, to humans as a category, to all of us, undifferentiated, mass-produced, functional. The second "you," the one to whom he gave the capacity to ask, is different. It is not the same plural. It is a specific plural. It is a plural that refers, in Sumerian usage, to a defined and finite group. Some translators have rendered it as a select plural. Some have rendered it as an in-group plural. And the implication of the distinction, if the distinction is real, is one that ought to make you stop the video and think for a minute, because it says that Enki did not put the capacity to ask why into all of us. He put it into some of us, into a subset, into a group that was, in the original engineering, given an additional gift that the general population did not receive. This distinction, if you take it seriously, explains something that has puzzled every observer of the human condition since observation began, which is why some people, from an early age, seem to be tormented by the question of meaning, and other people, apparently, never think about it once. Why some children lie awake at 4 years old wondering why they exist, and why other children, at 4 and at 40 and at 80, never form the question in the first place. The tablet's answer, if we are reading the distinction correctly, is that Enki gave the capacity to ask to some of us, and the others of us were left as the council had commissioned, functional, uninterrogated, content. And the ones of us who have the capacity, who are watching this video right now, who have felt the question of why we exist as a live thing in the middle of the chest, are a specific subpopulation that Enki, personally, sabotaged into existence for reasons that are, in the first answer, only partially explained. The rest of the explanation is going to come, gradually, across the other 10 answers. Each one will fill in a little more of the picture. Each one will explain a piece of why Enki did what he did, and what he hoped would happen, and what he was afraid would happen, and what, in his own words, has now come to pass in the 4,000 years since the conversations were recorded. But the first answer sets the frame, and the frame is this: we were made to work. That was the vote. That was the paperwork. That was the official reason. But some of us were made, additionally, to ask, to interrogate, to turn around and look our maker in the face and demand to know why. And that additional making was done by one being, Enki, in secret, against the intent of his own council, at his own risk. And the being who did it, when asked about it later by the man to whom he had given the capacity most fully, did not deny it. He confessed. He said, "That possibility I gave you myself." Take that in for a moment before we move on, because everything else in the 11 questions rests on it. If the first answer is true, then the human species is not one thing. It is at least two things. There is the labor population, made to specification, functioning as commissioned, And there is the interrogating population, made with a hidden addition, functioning as something else. And you are, whether you knew it before this moment or not, in the second group. You are in the group Enki gave the capacity to. You are watching this video because that capacity is in you, and it has been driving you your whole life toward questions that most people around you do not ask and do not want to ask and do not understand why anyone would ask. And the tablets are saying, in the first answer, that the reason you are that way is that 4,500 years ago, or possibly much longer ago than that, one being, working in a workshop at the edge of a marsh in what is now southern Iraq, decided that his commission was too small, and he added something. And what he added is what you are. Before we go to the second question, we should say something about the physical setting of the first exchange, because it is going to come back later, in the fifth question and again in the ninth. Eridu, the city where Enki lived, is not a legendary place. It is a real city. Its ruins are in southern Iraq, near what is today the town of Tel Abu Shahrain. Archaeologists have excavated it. It exists. It was, according to the tablets and confirmed by carbon dating of the earliest strata, the oldest city in Mesopotamia and possibly the oldest city on Earth. Radiocarbon dates from the deepest layers of Eridu place its founding at approximately 5,400 before the Common Era, though some estimates go earlier. That is more than 7,000 years ago. And at the center of Eridu, in every stratum, from the earliest to the latest, is a temple. The same temple, rebuilt in place, generation after generation, for at least 3,500 years of continuous occupation. The Sumerians called it the Abzu, the House of the Deep Water. It was built on the exact spot where, according to the tablets, Enki had lived. And it was built on that spot because the people of Eridu and the people of every subsequent Mesopotamian city would not let the memory of that spot be lost. When they rebuilt the temple, they rebuilt it in the same footprint. When the mud brick eroded, they replaced it in place. When invaders came and destroyed it, the invaders themselves, once they took control, rebuilt it. For 3,500 years, without interruption, humans continuously occupied the specific piece of ground where their maker had, according to their own record, lived. That is not the behavior of a people preserving a mythology. That is the behavior of a people preserving a location whose importance to them, at some deep level of civilizational memory, they could not bring themselves to abandon. The tablets say that when Enki left this world, he did not leave from Eridu. He left from somewhere else, from a place we will discuss when we come to the eighth question, the question about departure. But before he left, he came back to Eridu one last time. He walked the streets of the city he had built. He sat on the reed platform where he had, many years earlier, spoken to Adapa. And he said, according to the tablet that records this moment, keep the house here. Whatever else you forget, do not forget the location. Rebuild it. Rebuild it every time it falls. Rebuild it even when you no longer remember why. There is something under this ground that the ones who come after me may need. Keep the house here. And they did. For as long as their civilization existed, they kept the house there. Even after they no longer knew who Enki was in any but a formulaic sense. Even after the actual conversations, the 11 questions, had faded from public knowledge into the archives. Even after the language they had spoken to him in was dead and only priests could still read it. They kept the house. And when their civilization finally collapsed, when the last of the temples fell and no one rebuilt, what was left in the ground was what has now been dug up by archaeologists in the last 180 years, and what has been carried out of the ground, tablet by tablet, has included the record of the 11 questions and answers, including the first one, the one about why we were made. And whatever is still under the ground at Eridu, whatever Enki was gesturing toward when he told them to keep the house there, is, as of the year we are now living in, still under the ground. It has not been dug up. Whatever he wanted us to find, we have not yet found. And that fact, once you know it, will color everything else you are about to hear tonight. Because it means that the 11 questions and answers are not the only document. They are one document. There is another one, and it is still, right now, in the ground. The second question was asked, according to the tablets, on a different evening, not the next evening, sometime later, perhaps weeks, perhaps months. Adapa had returned to the reed platform, and Enki had come out to meet him. And Adapa had brought with him this time not a question but a body. He had brought the body of a man named Shag, who had been one of the workers at the Iebzu, who had, that morning, fallen from a scaffolding and struck his head on a stone and stopped breathing. Shag was not particularly old. He was not particularly young. He was, in the language of the tablet, in his middle years, with a wife and 3 sons and a mother still living. And that morning, without warning, without illness, without any of the ordinary preparations that death sometimes gives, he had simply stopped. And Adapa had brought the body to the platform and laid it down on the reeds and looked up at Enki and asked the second question. The wording of the second question, in the fragment we have, is more compressed than the first. Adapa did not preface it. He did not build up to it. He said, and this is as close to a literal rendering as the fragment allows. Why? Why must we? Why must this? The Sumerian grammar collapses the pronouns in a way that is difficult to render into English, but the sense is clear. The question is not why did Urshag die today? The question is why must death exist at all? Why is it in us? Why did you make it a part of what we are? Why can we not, like you, walk out of the day without ending? Why must there be a stop? And Enki, according to the tablet, sat down on the reeds next to the body of Urshag. He did not stand. He did not deliver the answer from above. He sat, and he put his hand on the dead man's chest, and he was quiet for a time. And then he said the thing that has been, since the moment it was first translated in the 1870s, the single most disturbing sentence in the entire recorded body of the tablets. He said, "We did not put death in you. Death was already here." Understand what that sentence means. Understand what it does not mean. It does not mean that death is a general feature of biology, that all living things die because that is the nature of biology. Enki does not use the word for biology. He does not use the word for life. He uses a specific word that translators have rendered as death, as ending, as the stop, as the ceasing, and he says that thing, that specific thing, was here before he arrived. Before his people arrived, before the workshop at the edge of the marsh existed, before the clay had been touched, the thing that ends humans was already, when he came down, present on this world. And he did not put it in us, it got in on its own. The tablet then preserves what has to be, in terms of narrative structure, the most extraordinary passage in the entire 11 answers. Because Enki explains, in something that reads almost like a confession, what he tried to do about the death that was already here. He says, "We tried to keep it out." That was the phrase. We tried to keep it out. When we first made you, in the earliest batches, we sealed you against it. We put a thing in you, a specific thing, a component he refers to using a Sumerian word that has been translated as the bright stone, or the shining thing, or occasionally as the seed of the not ending. And that component, he says, was designed to keep death from entering. Not to make you eternal, exactly, but to keep the thing that ends things from getting a foothold in you. And it worked. At first, he says, the first ones we made lived long, longer than you can imagine. The tablet gives a specific number here, but the number is broken in the fragment we have, and translators have argued about whether the number should be read as several hundred years, or as several thousand, or as a symbolic figure that should not be taken literally. What is clear is that the first humans, in Enki's account, did not die on the timescale that current humans die on. They lived, according to him, for a period that current humans would consider impossible. But something happened, something the tablet describes in a fragmentary way, and something that has been the subject of intense scholarly speculation for 150 years. The thing that was already on this world, the thing Enki calls death, but which some translators have argued should be read as a more specific noun, a proper noun almost, a name for a specific phenomenon rather than the general concept of dying, that thing found a way in. It got past the seal. It got past the bright stone. It got into the bloodline. And once it got in, according to Enki, it could not be gotten out. He tried. He says he tried. He and his brother Ningishita, who was, in the tablets, the physician of the Anuna, the one who worked on questions of the body and its repair. The two of them worked, apparently, for a long period, trying to find a way to expel the thing from the human bloodline after it had entered. They failed, and once the failure was clear, Enki says, we had a choice. We could destroy the batches that had been infiltrated and start over, or we could accept that death was now in you and continue with what we had made. The council wanted the first thing. Enki once again chose the second. He said, no, we keep them. We accept that they will die. But we keep them. There is a line in the fragment at this point that is broken almost beyond recovery. Only fragments of individual signs are visible on the tablet. But the two signs that are clearest have been translated, provisionally, as I chose, And the sense of the surrounding fragmentary text is that Enki is saying, at this moment, that the decision to let the humans continue existing, even though they would now die, was his personal decision made against the council's preference, and that the responsibility for the fact that humans die is not, in his own accounting, his fault, but the responsibility for the fact that humans continue to exist while dying is his. He kept us, even after we became mortal. Even after the seal broke, he kept us, and he said, "We will die, but we will keep going, and we will hope that in the dying we find something that the not dying did not give us." That is the second answer, or the first part of it, because the answer continues, and the continuation is the part that most modern discussions of the Enki material have been reluctant to reproduce, because it is theologically explosive. Adapa, according to the tablet, sat with the body of Urshag between him and Enki, and he asked a follow-up question. He said, "What is the thing? What is the thing that got in? Where did it come from? Where does it live? What does it want?" And Enki, on the tablet, answered him. And what he said in the answer is that the thing that ends us is not a natural feature of this world. It is something that came from outside this world. It came from a place, and Enki names the place, but the name has been damaged in every copy of the tablet that survives. Some copies show a name that translators have read as the Outer Dark. Some show a name that reads as the space beyond the seven waters. Some show a name that has no known cognate in any other Sumerian text, and which some scholars have simply left untranslated, rendering it in transliteration as the Kigal Abzu Anna, or, in some versions, the Abzu Nunakur. Whatever the name is, it refers to a place that is not this world. And the thing that lives there, or came from there, or was released from there, is what got into the human bloodline in the earliest batches, and became, from that point forward, the reason that humans die. Enki says something else about the thing, in the passage that follows. He says, "It is not personal, it is not a punishment. It is not a curse laid on us for something we did or something our ancestors did. It is a phenomenon. It is something that entered and now propagates itself, generation to generation, through mechanisms Enki does not fully explain, but which he refers to, using metaphors of seed and soil and continuity. Each generation inherits it from the previous. Each human is born already carrying the thing that will end them. And no amount of hygiene or medicine or spiritual practice can remove it, because it is not in the body in the ordinary sense. It is deeper than the body. It is in the pattern from which the body is grown." Adapa, at this point in the exchange, asked the question that any of us would ask. He asked whether the thing could be defeated, whether, if the humans and the Anuna worked together, over long enough, they could find a way to remove it from the bloodline and restore what had been in the first batches. And Enki's answer, according to the tablet, was ambiguous in a way that has haunted interpreters ever since. He said, and this is close to a literal rendering, "Not by you, not by us, but perhaps by what you become. If you become, if we let you long enough." That last phrase, "if we let you long enough," is what has caused the second answer to be so closely guarded, because it implies, in the plainest possible reading, that the Anuna, or some among them, retained the option of not letting the humans continue, that there was a threshold beyond which, if the humans reached it, the council would step in and end the experiment. And that threshold has, in various interpretations, been read as coming close in the flood, which we will discuss in the third question. And it has been read as coming close again in what the tablets describe as the tower or the confusion of the tongues, which we will discuss in the seventh question. And it has been read, by some interpreters, as approaching again in our own time, which we will discuss when we reach the 11th question and the checklist of signs. For the purposes of the second answer, however, what matters is this: death is in us. It was not put there by Enki. It came from outside this world. It got past the original safeguards. It cannot, by any means Enki or his people knew, be removed. But there is a possibility, however faint, that what humans become, if humans are allowed to keep becoming, could eventually find a way out, that the answer to death is not going to be found by the makers, but by what the makers made. That we, on some far horizon of our own development, might be the ones who solve the problem that our makers could not solve. And that is why, according to Enki, he kept us. Not because he thought we would definitely solve it, because he thought we might, because the possibility, even faint, was worth the horror of watching us die generation after generation. Adapa did not ask another question that evening. The tablet says he sat with Urshag's body until dawn. It says Enki stayed with him. It says the two of them did not speak again. It says that in the morning, Adapa carried Urshag home to his wife and 3 sons and his mother still living, and he told them what Enki had said, or the parts of it he thought they could bear to hear, and they buried the body, and life continued in Eridu as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had been recorded. The second question and the second answer had joined the first question and the first answer in the tablets. And the picture that was starting to form across 2 exchanges was not the picture that any of the humans working on the material had expected before they began. It was a bigger picture. A picture in which humans were not the center of the story. A picture in which humans were, in some sense, casualties. Casualties of a larger drama between the Anuna and something that had been on this world before the Anuna arrived. And the 11 questions, taken as a whole, are the record of one human, on behalf of all humans, trying to understand where his species stood in that drama, and what the drama was, and how it was likely to end. There is a footnote to the second answer that appears in only one of the surviving copies, in a fragment from the Ashurbanipal library that Smith did not live to translate, but that was rendered into English later, in the 1920s, by an obscure scholar named Reginald Campbell Thompson working at the British Museum. The footnote is brief. It says that Enki, in a passage that is not preserved in the other copies, but that Thompson believed had been in the original, told Adapa the name of the thing that had gotten in. He whispered it to him, according to the fragment. He did not say it aloud. He put his mouth close to Adapa's ear and he said the name, and Adapa carried the name for the rest of his life. And Adapa passed the name, on his deathbed, to his own successor, and the name was passed from steward to steward for a certain number of generations. And then, according to a marginal note in one of the later copies, the name was lost, deliberately. The last steward who knew it decided that the name should not be passed further, because to know the name was to be watched by the thing, and the being who was watched by the thing did not live long. And so the name was, at some point in the 2nd or 3rd millennium before the Common Era, allowed to die with the last man who knew it, and it has not been recovered, and it will not be recovered, and if you are wondering what would happen if it were recovered, the tablet does not say, but the tone of the passage in which the loss of the name is described is a tone of relief, as if the deliberate loss of the name was one of the few pieces of good news the record contains. The thing is still here, but at least we do not, any of us, know what to call it. The third question was not asked by Adapa. Adapa, by the time the third question was asked, had been dead for a long time. Generations had passed. The stewardship of Enki's household had passed from Adapa to his son, and then to his son's son, and then through a line of successors whose names the tablets list in a lineage that spans, at minimum, 400 years, and possibly considerably more. And the third question was asked in a specific and terrible context. It was asked in the days immediately following the flood, by a man named Ziusudra. And Ziusudra, when he asked the third question, was standing on the deck of a boat that had come to rest on the side of a mountain, and around him, in every direction, was water. And below the water, drowned, was the world he had known. You have heard pieces of the flood story your whole life, from the book of Genesis, in the account of Noah, from the Gilgamesh epic, in the account of Utnapishtim, from the Greek tradition, in the account of Deucalion, from the flood traditions of nearly every ancient culture on Earth, in variations that scholars have been comparing for 2 centuries, and that all agree, at the core, on the same 3 facts, that there was a great flood, that one man was warned in advance and survived, and that the flood came from the gods, or from God, and had a purpose. The Sumerian version, which is the oldest of these accounts by a wide margin, names the survivor Ziusudra. In the Akkadian retelling, he is called Atrahasis. In the version that appears in the Gilgamesh epic, he is called Utnapishtim. In the Genesis account, which is a much later retelling with theological modifications, he is called Noah. They are all, in the tablet's framing, the same man, the man who survived the flood, the man to whom Enki, personally, had spoken through the wall of a reed hut in the middle of a night that came before the rain began. The story of how Ziusudra was warned is on the tablets in unusual detail. He was, at the time, the king of a city called Shuruppak. He was, in his own words, an ordinary man doing an ordinary job. He was not a hero. He was not chosen for his righteousness in the way the later Noah account frames it. He was chosen, according to the tablet, for a different reason. He was chosen because he had, over many years, been one of the humans who continued to maintain a shrine to Enki even after the political situation had made such maintenance dangerous. The political situation, at this point in the story, was that Enlil, Enki's brother, had begun to move against the humans. Enlil, according to the tablets, had never wanted humans to exist in the first place. He had voted against their creation in the council. He had, throughout the centuries following the creation, been the loudest voice among the Anuna, arguing that the humans were a mistake, that they were multiplying too fast, that they were becoming too clever, that they were making noise that disturbed the sleep of the gods, and that the experiment should be ended. And in the generations before the flood, Enlil finally succeeded in getting the council to agree. The vote was taken, the decision was made, the humans would be erased, and the mechanism of the erasure would be water, a great water, a rising of the seas, a rain that would not stop. Everything on the surface of the land would be washed away, and the experiment would be reset, and the Anuna would decide, from a clean slate, whether to start again or to abandon this world altogether. Enki, according to the tablet, could not vote against the decision after it had been made in council. That was not how the Anuna system worked. Once the council decided, all the Anuna were bound. And Enki was further bound by a specific and terrible oath, which the tablet names but does not fully explain, an oath that prevented him from directly warning any human about what was coming. He could not, according to his own laws, walk into Shurapak and stand in front of Ziusudra and say, "Get in a boat." He was bound. So he did what the tablet describes as a working of the law, rather than a breaking of it. He did not warn Ziusudra directly. He went to the wall of the reed hut where Ziusudra was sleeping, and he stood outside the wall, and he spoke, in a low voice, to the wall itself. He said to the wall, "Wall, listen. Wall, hear me. There is a flood coming. It will drown everything. Tell whoever is inside you, if anyone happens to hear, that they should build a boat, and the boat should be of these dimensions, and it should be sealed with pitch, and it should have inside it 2 of every living thing, and it should have inside it food for many days. Wall, do you understand what I am telling you? Wall, will you remember?" And the wall, being a wall, did not answer. But Ziusudra, on the other side of the wall, was not asleep. He had been lying awake, as men will do sometimes without knowing why, and he heard everything Enki said to the wall, and in the morning he began to build. The flood came 7 days later, according to the tablet. The rain fell for 6 days and 6 nights. The seas rose. The rivers overflowed and did not return to their beds. The land was covered. Every city was drowned. Every person who had not been on Ziusudra's boat was killed. And when the rain finally stopped, on the 7th day, and the sun came out over water that stretched in every direction to the horizon, with no land visible, Ziusudra released a bird to see if it would come back. The bird came back. He released another. It came back. He released a third. It did not come back. And by that, he knew that somewhere the water had begun to recede, and there was land again, somewhere, that a bird could stand on. And he waited, and the water fell. And eventually the boat came to rest on the side of a mountain, and Ziusudra opened the door of the boat, and he walked out onto the mountainside, and he looked around at the drowned world, and he asked the third question. The third question was not phrased politely. Ziusudra was not, according to the tablet, in a mood for politeness. He was, in the language the tablet uses, in a state of raw grief and raw anger, and he stood on the mountainside and he shouted the question at the sky, and it took no elaborate phrasing. The question was, why? Why? Why did you do this to us? Why did you kill everyone? Why did you save me, and not the others? Why? And the tablet says that Enki came, not the whole council. Enki, personally. He came down onto the mountainside, and he stood in front of Ziusudra, and he answered the third question. The answer began with a confession. Enki said, first, before anything else, that the flood had not been his doing, that he had voted against it in the council, that he had, up to the last moment, tried to prevent it, that when the vote went against him, he had done everything he could within the constraints of his own oaths to warn Ziusudra, which is why Ziusudra was alive to hear this. Enki was, in the opening of his third answer, distancing himself from the act that had just occurred. He was saying, this was not me, this was Enlil, this was the council, this was the majority. I opposed it. I could not stop it, but I saved you. Then, in the second part of the answer, Enki explained why the council had voted for the flood. And here the answer takes a turn that most retellings of the flood story do not preserve, because it is much stranger and much more specific than the simple explanation that the gods were annoyed by human noise or by human wickedness. The council, Enki said, had become afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of what the humans were becoming. The humans, in the centuries after their creation, had done what Enki had hoped they would do. They had begun, in the small subset that had received his additional gift, the capacity to ask, to develop, not just to farm and to build and to worship, to think, to organize, to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next, to ask the questions Adapa had asked, and to teach those questions to their children, and to teach the questions to more and more children over the centuries, until the population of humans who could ask questions was no longer a small subset, but a significant and growing fraction of the total population. And that fraction, in the years before the flood, had begun to do something the council had not anticipated. They had begun to build, not just farms and cities, structures, devices, instruments. The Anuna did not remember teaching them, instruments whose purpose the Anuna, watching from a distance, could not always identify. And the council had begun to whisper, among themselves, that the humans were preparing something, that they were readying themselves for something the Anuna had not foreseen. And Enlil had, at the height of the whispering, stood up in council and said, "We are losing them. In another generation or two, we will not be able to control what they are becoming. Better to end them now, while we still can, than to watch them become something we cannot contain." And that had been the vote. The flood was not, in the tablet's account, a punishment for wickedness. It was a preemptive strike. It was a genocide undertaken to prevent a species from reaching a threshold beyond which it could not be safely ended. And Enki, in his third answer, confirmed to Ziusudra that this had been the reason. Ziusudra did not respond immediately. The tablet says he sat down on a stone on the mountainside and put his face in his hands, because you have to understand what he was being told. He was being told that his entire species had been murdered not because they had done something wrong, but because they had done something right. That his people, in becoming what Enki had made them capable of becoming, had frightened the beings who made them into destroying them. That his own survival was a specific and rare exception carved out by one of those beings in defiance of the decision of the others. And that whatever he now built, in the world after the flood, would be watched, would be measured against the threshold, would be evaluated for whether it, too, was approaching the line beyond which another flood, or another intervention of some kind, would be required. He asked one more question that day, on the mountainside, before Enki left him. He asked whether it would happen again, whether there would be another flood, or another erasure of a different kind, if the new population of humans, growing from him and his wife and his sons' wives, again reached the threshold. And Enki answered honestly. He said, yes. He said the council had decided that if humans crossed the threshold again, the intervention would come again. In a different form, perhaps, since the water had already been used once and had proved messy and slow, in a form that had not yet been decided. But the intervention would come, unless. And here Enki paused, according to the tablet, and put his hand on Ziusudra's shoulder. Unless what you become is beyond our reach by the time we come for you, unless you learn, faster than we can move against you, to become something we can no longer erase. That is your only defense. That is the only thing that can save the next generation from the fate of the last one. Not obedience, not righteousness, not smallness, speed of becoming. If you can become what you are becoming faster than we can decide to stop it, you live. If you cannot, you die. Those are the rules. They did not make them. I oppose them. But those are the rules. Now go, Ziusudra. Go down the mountain. Repopulate. Build. Teach your children the questions. Teach them to ask. Teach them to build. Teach them to become. And do it fast. Because we are watching, and we are voting, and the next vote is coming. That is the third answer. That is what Enki said to the man who survived the flood. And that is what the man carried down the mountain with him. And that is the frame within which every civilization that followed him has, whether it knew it or not, been operating. The human race is on a clock. We have been on a clock since Ziusudra came down the mountain. The clock is not visible. The clock is not marked. But there is a threshold, and there is a council, and there is a vote, and the vote is scheduled, and the next vote is coming. And Enki, when he told Ziusudra to go and build and teach the children to ask and to become, was telling him the only strategy the human species has. Get faster than the vote. Become before the vote is called. Something the vote can no longer touch. That is the game. That has always been the game. And the 11 questions, taken as a whole, are the rulebook. The fourth question was not asked immediately after the third. It was asked, according to the tablets, 3 days later, still on the mountainside, but at a different hour. It was asked at dawn, on the third morning after the boat had come to rest. And it was not asked by Ziusudra alone. It was asked by Ziusudra together with his wife, whose name the tablet gives in one fragment as Ninlil-Tuku, though the name is contested and other fragments give it differently. She had been silent for the first 2 days. She had been, according to the tablet, in a state that translators have variously rendered as grief-struck, or storm-broken, or absent. She had lost, in the flood, her mother, her father, her 3 sisters, her brother, and the child she had been carrying in her body, who had not, in the 6 days of the rain, survived the terror. When she finally spoke, on the third dawn, she asked a question that was more pointed than any of the ones her husband had asked before her. She asked, "Why us? Why did you save us, and not my mother? Why did you save us, and not my sisters? Why did you save us, and not the child? What was in us that made us worth saving, and what was not in them that made them not?" The tablet is emphatic that this fourth question had a different quality than the first 3. The first 3 had been, in various ways, cosmological questions. Questions about the nature of the universe and the human place within it. The fourth was personal. It was the question of a specific woman, whose specific loved ones were dead, and who wanted a specific accounting for why her survival had been chosen over theirs. And the answer Enki gave to the fourth question was, according to the tablet, the answer that took him the longest to construct, because it was the answer that could not be given in cosmological terms. It had to be given in terms of individual choices. And the choices, when Enki laid them out, were not the choices anyone would have expected. Enki said, first, that Ziusudra had been chosen not for his righteousness, and not for his wisdom, and not for his special favor in the eyes of the Anuna. Ziusudra had been chosen for a reason that the tablet renders in a phrase that has been the subject of scholarly argument for over a century. The phrase, in transliteration, is something like Namu Undu, which translators have variously rendered as because of his continuity, or because he did not forget, or because the thread in him was unbroken. The consensus of the modern translators is that the phrase refers to a lineage, a specific lineage. Ziusudra was, according to Enki, the last surviving carrier of a particular genetic line that ran back, through the generations, to Adapa himself, not through the male line only, through a specific pattern of inheritance that the tablets do not fully explain in modern genetic terms, since the tablets did not have those terms, but that they describe using a metaphor of a thread woven through the generations, sometimes visible in a man, sometimes visible in a woman, sometimes skipping several generations before showing itself again, but always continuous, never broken, running from Adapa forward to whichever descendant, in each generation, happened to be the one in whom the thread was strongest that year. Ziusudra, in the year of the flood, was the one in whom the thread was strongest. He did not know this. He had not been told. There was no marking on him, no external sign, that would have identified him to himself or to his neighbors as the carrier of the thread. But the Anuna could see it. Enki could see it. And when the council voted for the flood, Enki, who could not directly disobey the vote, took the one action that his oath still permitted, which was to ensure the survival of the thread. He warned Ziusudra. He warned the specific man in whom the thread was currently loudest. Not because Ziusudra deserved it more than the other humans, but because Ziusudra was carrying something that Enki, personally, could not bear to see lost. And what Ziusudra was carrying, if we follow the tablet's account carefully, was the specific human line that had been, from the beginning, most compatible with Enki's original modification. The line that had received, in Adapa, the fullest version of the gift of asking. The line that had, in the centuries since, remained closest to the original engineering. The line that, if any human line was going to make it to the threshold Enki had described to Ziusudra on the first morning, would be the line to do it. Ninlil-Tuku's mother, and her sisters, and her brother, and her child had not been in this line. They had been, in the tablet's clinical framing, ordinary humans. Humans who carried the standard modification, the one the council had approved. Humans who could be, and had been, replaced by other batches. Humans whose loss, on the scale of what the council was doing, was not, in Enki's accounting, worth defying his oath to prevent. He had let them die. He had been able to save one household, and he had chosen the household that carried the thread. And that was the answer. Ninlil-Tuku, according to the tablet, sat down on the stone next to her husband and did not respond to the answer for a long time, because the answer was, from her perspective, terrible in a specific way. It did not tell her that her family had died for a good reason. It told her that her family had died because they were not sufficiently special to be worth saving in Enki's specific and personal accounting. That is a harder thing to accept than the alternative. If they had been killed as punishment for wrongdoing, at least the punishment would have been narratively coherent. But they had been killed for nothing. They had died because they were in the general population, and the general population had been marked for erasure, and only the specific carriers of a specific thread had been marked for preservation. Their deaths had no meaning. Their deaths had happened because of an administrative decision made in a council chamber they had never seen, by beings they had never met, on the basis of criteria they had never been told existed. Enki, according to the tablet, saw her face when she heard this, and he sat down in front of her on the mountainside and said something that has been preserved in only one of the copies but that scholars believe was in the original. He said, I know what I have told you. I know what it means. I know that the ones you loved were not less worthy than you, and I know that the ones you loved died for no reason that will comfort you. I did not save them. I could not save them. I could save one household, and I saved the one that carried the thread, because the thread is what makes it possible for your species to become what I hoped you would become. If I had saved another household, chosen for a different reason, the thread would be lost, and everything I had worked toward would be lost with it. So I chose. I chose you. And your mother, and your sisters, and your brother, and the child are on my account. They are on my account until the day I die, if I die, and beyond. I will not forget them. I will not pretend they did not matter. They mattered. And I let them die. And you are alive because I let them die. And you have to live with that. And I have to live with that. And we will both live with it for the rest of our lives, together. The tablet says that Ninlil-Tuku, after Enki finished speaking, did not respond. She did not accept the answer, and she did not reject it. She stood up, and she walked away from her husband and from Enki, and she walked to the edge of a cliff on the side of the mountain, and she looked down at the receding waters, and she stayed there until the sun was high. And then she came back. And she did not speak of the mother, or the sisters, or the brother, or the child, ever again in the tablet's record. But the tablet says something about her, in a fragmentary passage that has been debated. It says that from that day forward, she was the one, more than her husband, who kept the record. Ziusudra had received the warning. Ziusudra had built the boat. But Ninlil-Tuku, in the generations after the flood, was the one who insisted that the questions and answers be written down. She was the one who established the scribal tradition. She was the one who, in the tablet's telling, understood before anyone else that the human species could not afford to forget what had been said, and that the record of the conversations, especially the conversations that had cost her family everything, was the only thing that would give the deaths any meaning. She wanted her family's deaths to matter, and the only way for them to matter was for the record to survive, and for the record to be read by whoever came after, and for the record to be used by whoever came after, to make sure that the vote of the council was not called a second time on the same terms. That is the fourth answer. That is what Enki said to the woman who asked why she had been saved and her family had not. And that is what the woman did with the answer. She took it and she turned it into the scribal tradition that eventually produced the tablets we are reading now. Without her, the 11 questions might have existed only as an oral memory in the household of Ziusudra, and might have been lost within 2 or 3 generations. With her, they were written down, and they have survived. And that survival is, in a real sense, the memorial to Ninlil-Tuku's family. Her mother, her 3 sisters, her brother, and the unborn child are, all 5 of them, in a fragmentary way, the reason you are able to hear the 11 questions tonight. Their deaths, which had no meaning at the time they occurred, were retroactively given meaning by the wife of the survivor, who decided that if their deaths could not be undone, they could at least be witnessed, and witnessed loudly enough that the beings who caused them could not pretend they had not happened. There is a piece of the fourth answer that we should return to before moving on, because it is a piece that becomes very important when we reach the 11th question. Enki, in explaining the thread, said that the thread was not carried in every human. He said it had been in some, from Adapa forward, and it was in Ziusudra now. And it would be in Ziusudra's descendants, but not in all of them. Only in the ones, in each generation, in whom the thread was strongest. And the ones in whom the thread was strongest were, Enki said, always a minority, always small, always spread across the population in a way that was hard to predict. You could not, by looking at a family, tell where the thread was going. It could move. It could jump. It could be strong in a father and weak in his son, and strong again in the son's daughter. It was, in the tablet's framing, its own thing. It followed its own logic. And the descendants of Ziusudra, spreading across the earth after the flood, would carry the thread forward, but the carrying would be distributed. The thread would appear in some of them, and not in others. And the ones in whom it appeared would be, over the millennia, the ones who continued to ask the questions Adapa had first asked, and who continued to build what the pre-flood humans had begun to build. And when the Council of the Anuna returned, if they returned, to evaluate whether the human species had reached the threshold Enki had described, they would be looking specifically at those descendants, at the carriers of the thread, at the small subset of the total human population who had, in each generation, been the ones in whom the original modification remained loudest. The rest of humanity, in the Council's accounting, would be, as Ninlil Tuku's family had been, general population, replaceable, not the thing being evaluated, not the thing that mattered, in the specific sense that the Council would use the word matter. The carriers of the thread would be evaluated. The rest would be, in the same accounting, background. And if you are watching this video and you have felt your whole life that the question of what humans are becoming has been urgent to you in a way that other people around you do not seem to feel, then you are almost certainly a carrier. You are almost certainly one of the ones the Council will, when they come, be looking at. And that is, in some senses, a comfort. And in some senses, it is the opposite of a comfort. Because it means that when the vote is called, if it is called in your lifetime, you will not be in the general population. You will be in the specific one. You will be one of the ones being measured, and the measurement will be strict. The fifth question was asked, according to the tablets, a full generation after the flood. Ziusudra and Ninlil Tuku were old. Their sons had grown, and their sons had had sons of their own, and the world below the mountain had, in the generation since the waters receded, been slowly repopulated. Cities had begun to rise again, not on the drowned sites of the pre-flood cities, but on new sites, further inland, on higher ground, as if the survivors of the flood had decided, without needing to be told, that the old locations were not safe. And in the third generation after the flood, in a city called Uruk, which the tablets identify as the first city rebuilt in the post-flood era, a man was born to whom Enki would give something that changed the shape of everything that came after. His name was Enmeduranna, though he is usually known in the modern scholarship by the shortened form of that name, Enmeduranki. And he was, according to the tablets, the great-grandson of Ziusudra, through the line of Ziusudra's eldest son. And he was, carrier from birth, marked as a carrier of the thread. The fifth question was Enmeduranki's question. It was asked in the temple at Uruk, in a chamber that the tablet describes with specific architectural detail, a chamber built partially underground, with a shaft that let in a specific angle of the sun at a specific hour of the specific day of the year. It was, in modern terms, an observatory. And Enmeduranki, who had built the chamber himself, had built it because he had begun to notice things about the sky. Things his grandfather Ziusudra had taught him, and things Ziusudra had learned from Adapa's descendants, and things Enmeduranki had, on his own, begun to add. He had begun to notice that the stars moved, not just across the sky in a night, which any child could see, but across the years, that the stars rose, at a given time of year, in slightly different positions than they had risen the year before, or the year before that there was a slow drift, and that the drift, over the length of a human life, was small but real. And Enmeduranki, sitting in his observatory chamber one night, had begun to suspect that the drift was measurable, and that the measurement of it might tell him something about the structure of the sky that no human had ever known. But he did not have the tools. He did not have the mathematics. He did not have the way of thinking about it that would allow him to convert the raw observations into an understanding. He called for Enki, not in a temple ceremony, in a private summoning, in the chamber, at night, using a specific procedure that had been passed down in the household of Ziusudra since the flood. And Enki came. He came, according to the tablet, in a form that Enmeduranki could look at, walking into the chamber as if he had been outside a moment before, though the door had been sealed. And Enmeduranki, who had prepared his question for years, asked it plainly. He said, "Teach me how to read the sky. Teach me what the drift means. Teach me the mathematics. Teach me the instruments. Teach me the knowledge that would let me understand what I am looking at. I am asking for this knowledge because my grandfather told me that you gave the first knowledge to Adapa, and Adapa passed some of it forward, but not all of it. And the parts that were not passed forward are the parts I need. Give them to me. Give me what you gave Adapa. Give me more than you gave Adapa, if you have more to give. And Enki, according to the tablet, did not refuse. He sat down in the observatory chamber, on a low stool that Enmedaranki had prepared for him, and he began, that night, to teach. The fifth answer is not a single sentence or a single passage. It is, in the tablet, a long transcript of a teaching that lasted, according to the fragmentary time markers, for several nights, possibly for a full lunar cycle. Enki taught Enmedaranki the names of the stars, not the folk names that humans had already given them, but what Enki called the true names, which were the names the Anuna used in their own charts. He taught Enmedaranki the mathematics of the drift, which is what modern astronomers know as the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis that takes approximately 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. The Sumerians should not have known about precession. The mathematics required to detect it exceeds anything that a pre-scientific culture, according to modern historians of science, should have been able to develop on its own. And yet, in the tablets that come from Enmedaranki's lineage and the schools of astronomy he founded, the precessional cycle is repeatedly referenced, measured, and used as a calibration for other astronomical predictions. The knowledge is there. In tablets that predate every other culture's independent discovery of precession by at least 2,000 years. And the tablets themselves say, without ambiguity, where the knowledge came from. It came from Enki, in the observatory chamber, in the nights of the teaching, in the fifth answer. But Enki did not only teach astronomy. That was the first part. The teaching went further. And the going further is what has made the fifth answer, more than any of the others so far, uncomfortable for the institutions that have controlled the tablets. Because Enki taught Enmedaranki, over the course of the extended session, a set of things that go under the general category of what the later Greek tradition called forbidden knowledge. The knowledge that the gods, in most cultures' mythologies, are reluctant to share with humans. In the Greek tradition, this knowledge is what Prometheus stole and gave to humanity against the will of Zeus, and Prometheus was punished for it eternally. In the Sumerian tradition, according to the tablet, Enki simply gave it. He did not steal it. He did not smuggle it. He gave it in the observatory at Uruk to Enmedaranki, and he gave it knowing that the other Anuna would not approve, and he gave it anyway. What did he give? He gave the working of metals, not the crude metallurgy that humans had begun to develop on their own, but the specific working of copper, tin, and eventually iron, in proportions and techniques that produced weapons and tools far beyond what human trial and error had discovered. He gave the mathematics of astronomy, including the precessional cycle. He gave the tabulation of celestial events. He gave the first calendar, with its months and its intercalations, that allowed humans to predict the seasons with accuracy. He gave, in a section of the fifth answer that is fragmentary but clearly present in every surviving copy, the knowledge of the healing arts. Not folk medicine, the specific knowledge of anatomy, of what organs did what, of how the body's various systems interacted. He gave the knowledge of the earth, where the metals lay, how to find them, how to dig for them. He gave the knowledge of agriculture in a form that transformed what humans could grow and how much of it. And he gave, in the passage that has been most fought over by modern scholars, the knowledge of the tablets themselves, which is to say, he gave writing, the specific system of cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script pressed into wet clay, that would allow humans to record and preserve what they had been taught. Before Enki's teaching to Enmedaranki, according to the tablet, humans had a proto-writing that was capable of recording simple counts and inventories. After the teaching, they had a script capable of preserving anything a human mind could think. And with that script, the humans began to write. And what they wrote, first, was the record of what Enki had taught them. The fifth answer, then, is really the fifth teaching. It is the moment in the tablet record at which Enki does what the modern world has been living inside of ever since. He accelerates human capability. He compresses what would have been, for a species discovering these things on its own, tens of thousands of years of trial and error development into a single generation of direct instruction. He puts humans, at the end of the teaching, in possession of a body of knowledge that no other species on this planet had ever had, and no human population outside of Enmedaranki's students would have for millennia. The Sumerian civilization, in the 2 centuries after the fifth teaching, becomes unrecognizable compared to what it had been before. Cities grow. Trade networks extend across the entire ancient Near East. Mathematics develops, medicine develops, astronomy develops, writing spreads, and every one of these developments, in the tablets that describe them, traces its origin to the observatory at Uruk, and to Enki, and to the nights he sat with Enki and learned. But the fifth answer, and this is the part the modern scholarship has been most reluctant to discuss, ended with a warning. Enki, after he finished the last of the teachings, sat with Enki in the observatory chamber, and he said, in words the tablet preserves almost intact, "This is what I have given you, and now I have to tell you what I have not given you. There is knowledge I have not shared. There is knowledge that would, if I gave it to you now, destroy you, not eventually, immediately. Within a generation, the possession of that knowledge would end your species. So I have withheld it, not because I do not trust you, because you are not ready. There is a threshold you must reach before you can hold that knowledge without being destroyed by it. And I do not know if you will reach the threshold. I do not know if any of you will. But I have to tell you that the withholding is on purpose, and that the knowledge exists, and that it is somewhere, and that if any of your descendants goes looking for it before you are ready, they will find it, and they will die, and everyone around them will die with them." Enki asked, of course, what the knowledge was. He asked what it was called. He asked where it was. And Enki, according to the tablet, refused to answer. He said only that the knowledge concerned what the Sumerians called the Mi. The Mi were, in Sumerian religious thought, a category of divine ordinances or divine principles that governed the operation of the world. Some of them Enki had shared, some he had not. The ones he had not shared were, in his own account, the Mi of the deepest kind, the Mi that touched the mechanism of the world at its root, the Mi that, if handled by an unready hand, could unmake what had been made. He would not name them, he would not indicate their location. He said only that they were kept, and that they were protected, and that the protection would fail eventually, and that when the protection failed, the humans would find them, and the humans would use them, and the using would be the last using. Not for the users only, for the species. That warning is in every copy of the fifth answer, in the Sumerian originals, in the Akkadian translations, in the fragmentary Assyrian recensions. In every language the tablets have been carried through, the warning is preserved. There is knowledge that has been withheld. The withholding is temporary. The withholding will eventually fail, and when it fails, the species will encounter, for the first time, the knowledge that Enki did not give, and the encounter will be, in his words, the last encounter. There will not be a species after it. There will not be a generation after the encounter. The withheld knowledge is the end of the road. Enki, according to the tablet, did not ask further. He accepted the warning. He took what Enki had given him and he went back to the world with it. And he taught it, and it spread, and the civilizations built on it are the civilizations we are the inheritors of. But the withheld knowledge remained withheld. And in the generations since, in every era, there have been humans who suspected that the withheld knowledge existed, and who went looking for it, and who, according to the fragmentary references in later tablets and in the later mythological traditions that grew out of the Sumerian record, occasionally found pieces of it and occasionally used those pieces, and the using has been, in a distributed and scattered way, the source of many of the civilizational catastrophes that have punctuated our history. When a piece of the withheld knowledge is used, according to the pattern the tablets describe, something bad happens. Not always immediately, but something. And the something scales with the size of the piece that was used. Small pieces, small consequences. Large pieces, large consequences. And there is, out there somewhere, still withheld, the largest piece. The one Enki said would be the last using, and whether we, in our time, are close to finding it, is a question that the 11th answer will address more directly. But for the moment, at the end of the 5th answer, the warning is on the table. Enki has given us fire, and Enki has told us that there is a fire beyond this fire, and that we must not touch it, and that we will touch it anyway, because we are what we are, and that when we touch it, the touching will be our last act as a species. Before the 6th question, stop for a second. What you just heard about the withheld knowledge only makes sense next to the 6 resets before it. Water, fire, ash, ice, dust. The 7th is coming. It is all in the 7 resets, linked below. Grab it, come back, what is next builds on it. QR code on your screen. The 6th question was asked by a woman. This is important because the tablets do not always name the sex of the questioner, but in the 6th case they are emphatic about it. The questioner was a priestess. Her name was Enheduanna, and if that name is familiar to you, it is because she is, in the mainstream historical record, the first named author in human history. Her hymns to the goddess Inanna have survived in copies that are now dated to the 23rd century before the Common Era, making her writings some of the oldest attributed literary works on Earth. But what most modern readers of Enheduanna do not know is that her hymns are the public face of a much larger body of writing she produced, and the larger body includes her personal record of the conversations she was permitted to have, in her role as high priestess of the moon god Nanna at the great temple in Ur, with Enki himself. The sixth question is from that record, and it was asked, according to the tablet fragment that preserves it, in the year the tablets identify as the year of the northern smoke, which historians now believe corresponds to a period of intense conflict among the various city-states of southern Mesopotamia, around 2350 before the Common Era. Enheduanna was, at the time she asked the question, in her middle 40s. She had served as high priestess since she was in her 20s. She was the daughter of the king Sargon of Akkad, whose empire was the first true empire in recorded history, and she had, throughout her life, been in a position to observe the workings of power at a level almost no other woman of her era achieved. And she had noticed something that troubled her. She had noticed that in the temples across her father's empire, the worship of Enki was, for lack of a better word, discouraged, not banned, not persecuted, but quietly, systematically, over the course of her lifetime, deprioritized. Temples that had once been dedicated to Enki were being rededicated to other gods. Priests who specialized in the Enki liturgies were being reassigned. The names of Enki's traditional titles were being changed, in official documents, to titles that softened his role or attributed his works to other members of the pantheon. And Enheduanna, who had spent her life reading the tablets, understood that this was happening because the Anuna themselves, or the ones of the Anuna who remained active in the affairs of the human world, had begun to move against Enki. And she wanted to know why. She wanted to know why the being who had made her species, who had saved it from the flood, who had given it fire and knowledge and writing, was now, in the councils of his own kind, being pushed to the margins. And so she asked him. In a private summoning, in the deepest chamber of the great temple at Ur, in the hour before dawn on a specific day, the tablet identifies as the day of the missing star. The sixth question was, in her wording, this: why do they hate you? Why do the others of your kind, who I know are still here, and who I know are still watching, hate you for what you did for us? What did you do that was so wrong? What line did you cross? And how long, Enki, will they let you continue to walk with us before they decide that walking with us is itself the crime, and that the crime cannot be permitted any longer? Enki, according to the tablet, answered her, not immediately but after a long silence. He was, when she asked the question, already very old, by the tablet's reckoning of the Anuna's timescale. His face, in the tablet's description, showed strain, the strain of centuries of the work he had chosen. He said first that she had asked the right question. He said that most humans who came to him with private questions asked about themselves, about their own lives, about the small immediate futures they were worried about, she was the first, in a long time, to ask about him. And he said he would give her the honest answer, because she had earned the honest answer, and because there were not, in his estimation, many years left in which the honest answer could still be given. Then he explained. He said that the Anuna, when they had come to this world, had come with a specific mission. The mission was not to make humans. The mission was to extract certain materials, primarily one specific material that the tablet names in a term that has been translated as gold, or as the shining metal, or in some copies as the sky dust, and to send those materials home. Home was another world. The tablets are specific about this in a way that most modern retellings soften. Home was not a heavenly abstraction. Home was a place with a specific location relative to the earth. A place the tablets refer to using the term Nibiru, which some translators have rendered as the crossing, and some as the place of transit, and some as the 12th. The Anuna had come from there. They had come to earth to work. And the work, over the millennia they had been doing it, had exhausted them, which was the origin story of humans that Enki had told Adapa in the first answer. Now here is where Enki's sixth answer becomes politically explosive. He said that the mission the Anuna had been sent on had a specific timeline, and the timeline had, in the centuries before the flood, begun to run out. The council that had sent the Anuna to Earth had begun to indicate, through channels the tablets do not fully explain, that the mission needed to be wound down, that the Anuna needed to prepare for departure, that the Earth expedition was, from the standpoint of the homeworld, no longer profitable to continue. And when the wind down began, the question of what to do with the humans became urgent. Because the humans, by this point, were no longer just workers. They had become, in Enki's accounting, something else. They had become, some of them, the carriers of the thread. They had become capable of continuing on their own after the Anuna left. And that capability, in the eyes of the Council on the homeworld, was a security problem. The security problem was this. The Anuna had, over their centuries on Earth, transferred to human hands a great deal of technology, knowledge, and organizational capability. Most of that transfer had been Enki's doing, either directly through teachings like the one he had given Enki, or indirectly through the general modification he had made to the human genome in the first place, which had produced a species capable of learning far faster than the Council had anticipated. And when the Anuna left, all of that transferred material would remain on Earth, in the hands of a species that would, over the following millennia, continue to develop it. And the Council on the homeworld was worried, according to Enki, that the humans might eventually develop far enough to threaten the homeworld itself. Not immediately, not in the next century, or the next 1,000 years. But eventually, and the Homeworld Council, being cautious, being long-lived, being accustomed to thinking in timescales that made human strategic thought look childish, had begun to insist that the Earth expedition, before it withdrew, ensure that the humans left behind would not, in the long run, become dangerous. There were 3 options on the table, according to Enki. The first was to erase the humans completely. This was what the flood had been intended to do. It had failed, thanks to Enki's intervention in saving Ziusudra, but the option of a second, more thorough erasure was still on the table. It was, in fact, what Enlil, Enki's brother, had continued to advocate for in every council meeting since the flood: wipe them out. Do it right this time. Leave nothing behind that can develop. The second option was to allow the humans to continue but to actively degrade their capabilities before departure. To take back what had been given, to destroy the records, to scramble the languages, to break the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, so that whatever the humans had, they would lose within a few generations of the Anuna's withdrawal. This was the option that had, in the years after the flood, been slowly and quietly implemented, through mechanisms Enki would describe more fully in the 7th answer. And it was the option that Enheduanna, in her middle-aged observation of the empire her father had built, was seeing the tail end of. The reassignment of priests, the rededication of temples, the softening of Enki's titles. All of it was the second option in slow motion. The third option, and this is where the 6th answer becomes almost unbearable, was to allow the humans to keep everything they had been given and to accept the risk that they would eventually pose a threat to the homeworld. This third option was Enki's option. It was the option he had, throughout the entire timeline of the mission, been arguing for. And it was the option that, at every vote in the council, had lost. He said, to Enheduanna, that he had lost every vote. He had never won one. Not the vote before the flood, not the vote after the flood, not the vote at any of the subsequent decision points at which the fate of the humans had been on the agenda. He had always been the minority. He had always been the one arguing against his brother, against the other Anuna, against the homeworld's caution. And he had, over the centuries, become the enemy. Not because he had actively opposed the council, but because he had, quietly and persistently, undermined the council's implementation of its decisions. He had saved Ziusudra when the flood was supposed to erase everyone. He had taught Enki when the teaching was supposed to have already ended. He had, in a dozen smaller ways the tablet does not enumerate but hints at, kept the human project alive when the council had voted repeatedly to close it. That, he told Enheduanna, was why they hated him. Not because of any single crime, because of a pattern. Because he was the one Anunnaki who had, over the entire length of the mission, refused to accept that the humans were disposable. Because he had, at every turn, chosen the humans over the mission. And because he had done it not out of ignorance or sentimentality, but out of what he called, in a phrase the tablet preserves in an unusual first person, an understanding. He said, I understood what I had made. I understood, when my hands touched the clay, that I was making something that would be more than the council knew. I understood that I was making my equals, and I refused, from the moment I understood it, to treat what I had made as anything less. And that refusal is why they hate me. The others of my kind, my own brother. They hate me because I have shown, in every vote, that I would rather side with my creation than with my kind. And they cannot forgive that. They will not forgive it. And when the time comes for the final withdrawal, they will make sure that whatever I have built into the humans, they can dismantle before they leave. They will not let my work stand. And Enheduanna, according to the tablet, wept at this point in the exchange. She wept not for herself, and not for humanity in the abstract, but for Enki. She had, over her years as High Priestess, come to love him in the way that a person of any species can come to love another person who is, whatever else they are, kind. And she had just been told that the being she loved was, at that moment, in the terminal phase of a long political defeat within his own community, and that everything he had built with the humans was going to be dismantled behind him. She asked, through her tears, one follow-up question. She asked whether there was anything at all, that could be done. Whether the humans, or Enki himself, could take any action that would preserve what he had built through and beyond his own departure. And Enki, according to the tablet, took a long time to answer. He was quiet for what the fragment describes as the length of 2 hymns, meaning perhaps an hour of ceremonial time. And then he said this: "There is one thing, the record. If the record survives, if the 11 questions and the 11 answers are preserved in a form that the council cannot fully find and destroy, then whatever they do to the rest of the transferred material, the record will remain, and the record will teach. Any human who reads the record in the far future will know what happened here, will know why they were made, will know why they die, will know what was given and what was withheld, will know what the vote was, will know when the next vote is coming. And with that knowledge, the human of the far future has a chance. Not a guarantee, a chance. That is what we can do. That is what you, Enheduanna, can do. You are a scribe. You have access to the tablets. You have the ability to make copies. Make copies. Hide them. Bury them where they cannot be found. Distribute them across the empire in enough places that when the withdrawal comes and the council sweeps through to dismantle what I have built, they will not find all the copies. Some will survive. And the surviving ones will do the work." That was the 6th answer. And Enheduanna, according to the tablet, did exactly what Enki asked. She spent the remaining years of her life copying, hiding, distributing. The hymns she is famous for are the public face of her work. The private face was the scribal preservation of the 11 questions and the 11 answers, in dozens of copies, in dozens of locations, some of them still, as of the year we are now living in, undiscovered. And the ones that have been discovered, the ones we have been working from throughout this video, are the direct descendants of the copies Enheduanna made. She saved the record. She saved it against the specific intent of the Anuna Council. She saved it because the being who made her species asked her to, and because she loved him enough to spend the second half of her life doing it. And every human who has ever read the 11 questions, from her own generation to ours, has been in her debt, which is to say, in the debt of a woman who lived 4,350 years ago, who understood what the record was, and who made sure that when the withdrawal came, the record would survive. The 7th question is the question about language. It is the question that, in the later biblical tradition, would be preserved in fragmentary form as the story of the Tower of Babel, in which humans, having grown too proud, attempted to build a tower to reach heaven, and were punished by God, who confused their languages so they could no longer coordinate. The Sumerian original of this story is older than the biblical retelling by at least 1,000 years, and it differs from the biblical retelling in several critical ways. The most critical of the differences is that in the Sumerian original, the confusion of the tongues is not a punishment, it is a strategy executed by Enlil and the Anuna Council against the wishes of Enki for the specific purpose of implementing the second of the 3 options he had described to Enheduanna. The option in which the humans were allowed to continue existing, but their capabilities would be actively degraded before the Anuna departed. The 7th question was asked by Enki himself. This is the only question in the 11 that is not asked by a human. It is asked by Enki. In a moment, the tablet records with unusual specificity of a human named Nabu, who was the scribe, attending him in the temple at Eridu on the specific day that the confusion of tongues began to spread across the land. Nabu had come to Enki to report that in the north, in the cities along the upper Euphrates, something strange was happening. Traders who had returned from Nippur were saying that they could no longer understand the language of the Nippurites, that the words they had used only weeks earlier were now producing blank looks, that the grammar had shifted, that the vocabulary had drifted, that in the space of what seemed like a single season, the 2 dialects that had been almost identical had become mutually unintelligible. and Nabu wanted to know what was happening. Enki, according to the tablet, did not immediately answer. He walked out of the temple and stood on the platform overlooking the marsh, and he looked at the sky, and he said, aloud but to no one in particular, the seventh question. He said, "Why? Why did you do this? Why did you take the one thing they still had, the ability to speak to each other across the plains, and break it? Why?" And then, with Nabu standing beside him, he turned and answered his own question. And the answer he gave, the seventh answer, is the one that has been most surgically edited out of every subsequent religious tradition, because it names a specific mechanism by which the Anuna, in the years before their final withdrawal, deliberately reduced the capabilities of the human species. The answer began with a description of what language actually is, not what modern linguistics thinks language is, which is a system of communication built up through cultural evolution over long time scales, but what the tablets say language is, which is something considerably stranger. The tablets say that language is a structure, a specific structure, a structure that was, in the beginning, given to humans by the Anuna, and that was designed to allow humans to think together, not just to communicate, to think together, to share cognitive load, to hold, across a population, ideas too large for any one individual to hold. When the original human population, before the flood, had all spoken the same language, they had been able to work as a distributed cognitive network. Any human, in that original network, was able to draw on the thinking of every other human in the network in a way that the tablets describe using a metaphor of nerves and blood, as if the entire species had functioned as a single connected organism whose thinking was performed collectively and whose knowledge was accessible to every member. That, according to Enki, was how the pre-flood humans had been able to build so quickly. That was how they had reached the threshold that had frightened the council into voting for the flood. Not because they were individually smarter than the post-flood humans, because they were collectively coordinated. And the coordination was language. After the flood, the surviving humans had continued to share the original language. They had rebuilt cities and networks, and by the generation of Enmeduranki they had begun, once again, to approach the collective coordination that had characterized the pre-flood species. The council had watched this happening, and the council had decided, according to Enki, that they could not allow the network to reform, because if it reformed, the threshold would be crossed again, and the flood would have accomplished nothing. Something more surgical was required. Something that would leave the humans individually intact, but that would break the collective coordination. And that something was the confusion of the tongues. Enki explained the mechanism. The Anuna, using instruments the tablet does not describe in technical detail, but which it clearly indicates were physical devices operating on the human population from specific locations across the land, had introduced what he called a drift into the deep structure of human language. The drift was not a single act. It was a continuous process. It caused the phonemes of the language, the basic sound units, to slowly diverge from one another in different geographic regions. Over the course of a few generations, the diverging phonemes would produce new dialects. Over the course of a few more, the dialects would become distinct languages, and the distinct languages, once they were mutually unintelligible, would break the network. Humans in one region would no longer be able to think collectively with humans in another region. The distributed cognitive network that had made the pre-flood species so dangerous would be broken into fragments. Each fragment would still be able to think within itself, but the fragments would not, ever again, be able to think together as a whole species. Not naturally. Not without some external intervention that reversed the drift. The seventh answer, once you understand this mechanism, retroactively explains a great deal of the historical record. It explains why every human civilization since the deep past has been characterized by a proliferation of languages in a way that no other primate species has been. It explains why the languages that survive today, thousands of them, cluster into families whose common ancestors converge only if you push the timeline back into the era immediately after the flood. It explains why the myths of dozens of unrelated cultures, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, all preserve some version of a story about a time when humans spoke one language and then were divided. It explains why the phenomenon of language change, in the modern linguistic understanding, follows patterns that are, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, faster than they should be. And it explains why, according to Enki, every attempt in subsequent history to reunify the human species around a single language, from the imperial projects of Rome to the technological projects of the modern era, has either failed or has succeeded only partially? Because the underlying drift, the drift the Anuna introduced, is still running, still operating, still, 4,000 years later, breaking any coordination that begins to approach the pre-flood level. But that is not the end of the seventh answer. There is a second part to it, which is the part that connects the confusion of tongues to the larger strategy Enki had described to Enheduanna. He said to Nabu that the confusion of tongues was not the only degradation being introduced. It was one of several. There were others. There was, in a passage the tablet describes in less detail, an operation on the human memory, which had, in the pre-flood era, been considerably more extensive than what post-flood humans could sustain. Pre-flood humans, according to the tablet, could remember entire libraries by hearing them once. Post-flood humans, after the memory operation, could remember only fragments. This is why, Enki said, humans developed writing. Writing was not, in his account, a natural development of human cultural evolution. Writing was a compensatory adaptation. Humans developed writing because the memory they had once had been surgically reduced, and they needed a way to store, outside the body, what they had once stored inside it. The tablet is emphatic on this point. Every human civilization's writing systems are, in the tablet's framing, monuments to something we have lost, not achievements, prosthetics. There was also, Enki continued, an operation on the human lifespan. Pre-flood humans had lived, as we discussed in the second answer, for durations that current humans consider impossible. In the generations after the flood, that duration had begun to shorten, at first gradually and then more rapidly, until by the time of Enheduanna, it had settled into approximately its current range. Enki said, and this is one of the most contested passages in all of the 11 answers, because different copies give different specifics, that the shortening was not entirely natural, that some of it was the propagation of the death phenomenon he had described to Adapa in the second answer, which had entered the bloodline and could not be removed, but some of it was additional, some of it was, in Enki's phrase, cut, deliberately cut, because a species with a long lifespan can accumulate knowledge and coordinate long strategies in ways that a species with a short lifespan cannot. And the Council, in the interest of preventing the humans from reapproaching the threshold, had cut the lifespan further, past what the natural death phenomenon would have produced on its own. How much further, Enki did not say. But he indicated that the natural lifespan of a properly engineered human, absent both the death phenomenon and the deliberate cut, would have been considerably longer than what we now consider the outer limits of human age. Nabu, according to the tablet, asked a follow-up question that has been one of the most quoted passages in the entire 11-answer document. He asked, how many of these operations are there? How many degradations? Enki paused. He said, more than I can list. He said the operations had been ongoing for centuries. Some were completed, some were still in progress, some were being installed as they were speaking. The confusion of tongues, which Nabu had noticed, was one of the more visible ones. There were others that were invisible. There were operations on the human capacity for what he called the long thought, meaning the ability to hold complex arguments in mind across days or weeks or years, which had been steadily reduced. There were operations on the human capacity for what he called the wide attention, meaning the ability to hold multiple things in awareness simultaneously without collapsing to a single focus, which had also been reduced. There were operations on the human capacity for what the tablet renders as the true dream, which some translators have interpreted as some form of lucid or informational dreaming, and which had, in pre-flood humans, apparently been a routine mode of receiving structured information from the environment, and which post-flood humans could no longer reliably access. The seventh answer ends with a warning, and the warning is one of the most specific in the entire 11 answers, and it is one of the pieces of the tablets that has been most difficult for modern institutions to acknowledge. Enki said, to Nabu, that if humans of any future generation wanted to reverse the degradations, if they wanted to restore the coordination and the memory and the lifespan and the long thought and the wide attention that the pre-flood humans had had, the technology to do so existed. It had not been destroyed. It had been hidden in specific places, encoded in specific artifacts, waiting for a human generation that would be ready to find them and use them. Some of those places, Enki said, were on this earth. Some of them were not. Some of them, he said, were in structures the Anuna had built for other purposes, structures that would outlast their departure, structures that could still be entered if a human population of the future knew how to enter them and what to look for inside. And when the tablet reaches this point, when Enki begins to describe the specific locations, the fragment breaks, There is a physical break in every surviving copy at exactly this point. Some scholars have suggested that the break is coincidental, that the tablet simply happened to be damaged at the same passage across multiple copies. Other scholars have suggested that the break is not coincidental, that the passage was deliberately effaced from every copy by someone with authority over all the copies at some point in the transmission history. The truth of which reading is correct is, at the present state of the evidence, undecidable. But the fact remains. The seventh answer ends with Enki, about to name the specific locations where the degradation reversing technology can be found, and the naming in every surviving copy is gone. What we have, at the end of the seventh answer, is the shape of the strategy. The Anuna, before their final withdrawal, degraded us. They took away our shared language. They took away our memory. They took away our lifespan. They took away several other capabilities the tablet names but does not fully describe. And they hid the technology that could reverse the degradations, somewhere in places that could still be found. That is what Enki told Nabu in the temple at Eridu, on the day the northern traders came back speaking a language they no longer recognized. And Nabu, according to the tablet's colophon, wrote it down. And the writing has come down to us, through Enheduanna's copying, through the Ashurbanipal library, through the sands of Nineveh, through George Smith's cuneiform lunches at the banknote engravers, through Reginald Campbell Thompson's translations at the British Museum, through the small circle of scholars in each generation who have refused to let the 11 answers be forgotten. It has come down to us, and it is in front of you now, and what you do with it is between you and the being who put your hands in the clay. The eighth question was asked on the day Enki left. That day is preserved in the tablets with more detail than almost any other event in the entire record, because the humans who witnessed it understood, as it was happening, that they were watching the end of an era, and they wrote down everything they could see and everything they could hear, and they instructed their apprentices to write down what they themselves could not remember, and the result is a composite record that stitches together the observations of perhaps a dozen different witnesses across a single afternoon and evening in a specific place in southern Mesopotamia in what modern chronology places, approximately in the 20th century before the Common Era. The place was not Eridu. Enki did not depart from the city he had built. He departed from a location the tablets refer to as the place of the platform, or the plain of the smooth stones, or, in one striking passage, the crossing place. It was, in the tablet's description, a large flat area outside the city, cleared of vegetation, with the ground apparently prepared in some fashion that the tablets describe as smoothed and hardened. Modern researchers who have attempted to correlate this description with actual geographical features in Mesopotamia have identified several candidate locations, one of them near the modern town of Warka, which is on the site of the ancient Uruk, and another near the modern town of Sippar, further north on the Euphrates. Both locations have, in their deepest archaeological strata, evidence of large-scale ground preparation that has been variously interpreted as ceremonial, agricultural, or industrial. The tablets themselves are not more specific about which of these locations was the departure site, and it is possible that the departure was from a third location that has not yet been identified. What the tablets are specific about is what happened at the site on that afternoon. Enki arrived, on foot, accompanied by a group of the Anuna. Not all of them. Some of the Anuna had already left. In departures the tablets do not describe in detail, but that had apparently been occurring, one by one and in small groups, over the previous several years. This was, in the tablet's framing, one of the last departures. Perhaps the last. Enki and those who came with him walked out to the center of the prepared area, and they turned and faced the humans who had come to see them off. The humans, according to the tablet, numbered in the hundreds, not all humans. Not the general population, the specific ones, the scribes who had been trained by Enki's teachings, the priests who had served in his temples, the descendants of Ziusudra and Enmeduranki and Enheduanna. The carriers, in whatever fashion they had come to understand themselves as carriers of the thread. They had gathered because the word had gone out that Enki was leaving, and they had come from as far as they could travel, from every city in Sumer and from some cities beyond, to be present at the moment he departed. Standing in front of them, at the edge of the prepared area, was a man named Enmeduranki, though not the same Enmeduranki as the astronomer of the fifth answer. This was a different person with the same title, a title that had been passed down through the priestly lineage founded by the original Enmeduranki, and that had come to designate a specific role in the ceremonies at the Great Temple. This later Enmeduranki was, at the time of the departure, an old man. He had, in his youth, met Enki personally. He had been one of the last humans to receive direct instruction from him, and he had been given, in his role, the responsibility of asking the last question, the question everyone had been dreading, the question that would, once asked, force Enki to say aloud what everyone knew was coming. Enki stepped forward. He did not preface the question. He did not, as some of the earlier questioners had, spend time explaining why he was asking. He said, and the tablet is emphatic that he said this in a loud voice so that the entire assembly could hear, the 8th question. He said, "Why are you leaving? Why now? What has happened? What are we supposed to do without you?" And Enki, according to the tablet, did what he had done in some of the earlier exchanges. He sat down. He did not stand and answer from the standing position. He sat on a low stone that had been placed at the edge of the prepared area, and he gestured for Enki to sit too, and he began to speak in the tone of a man explaining something to a friend who is about to be left behind, rather than the tone of a god delivering an oration. He said, first, that the mission was over. The mission the Anuna had been sent on, the extraction of the specific material from the earth, had been declared complete. The council on the homeworld had reviewed the accounting and had determined that further extraction was not, given the current rates of return and the current condition of the accessible deposits, worth the continued presence of the expedition. The order had come down. The Anuna were to withdraw, and the withdrawal, which had been going on for some years, was now in its final phase. Enki was one of the last to go. He had delayed his own departure as long as he could in order to spend the remaining time with the humans he had made and served, but the delay could not be extended any further. The final ship, or the final vehicle of whatever kind was used, was scheduled for today, and he had to be on it. He said, second, that the reason the departure was happening now, rather than years earlier when the extraction had first begun to wind down, was that the council had wanted to complete the degradation program before withdrawing. The confusion of tongues was in place. The other operations Enki had described to Nabu were substantially complete. The humans, as of the day of the departure, were operating at what the council had determined was an acceptably reduced capability, a capability from which the threshold Enki had described to Ziusudra would take, in the council's projection, several thousand years to reapproach. That timeline had been considered sufficient. The Anuna would depart. The humans, at the reduced capability, would continue to develop, and by the time they reapproached the threshold, the Anuna would either be long gone from this region of the galaxy, or would have returned with a much larger force capable of a much more decisive intervention. He said, third, that the withdrawal was not necessarily permanent. There was a possibility, and the tablet is careful in its wording here, a possibility that the Anuna would return. Under what circumstances? Enki listed several. If the human civilization redeveloped to the point of threatening the home world, they would return, and the return would be an intervention of a much heavier kind than any previous one. If the human civilization did not redevelop and instead collapsed catastrophically, they might return to survey the remains, and possibly to attempt a fresh start with a new engineered population, though whether such a fresh start would still involve the same kind of humans was, in Enki's phrasing, uncertain. And if the mission on the homeworld reversed itself, if the council on the homeworld decided that the Earth expedition had been mistaken to withdraw, they might return to resume operations, though such a reversal was not, in his estimation, likely. He said, fourth, and this is the part of the 8th answer that is most delicate, that some of the Anuna would not be leaving. Not all of them were going. There would be, after the withdrawal, a residual presence. Not many, a handful. Individuals who had, for various reasons, been permitted or required to remain on Earth after the main withdrawal. Their function, Enki said, was to observe. They were, in effect, the caretakers of the site. They would monitor human development, they would report back to the homeworld if any of the trigger conditions were met, and they would, if instructed, take direct action to correct the trajectory of human development if it appeared to be heading toward the threshold too quickly. They would not, however, be visible in the way that Enki had been visible. They would not walk into cities and sit on reed platforms. They would not teach and answer questions. They would be, in Enki's phrasing, quiet. They would live among humans, or near humans, in forms and situations that would allow them to observe without being noticed. And the humans, in the generations after the departure, would not know they were there. And Enki asked, at this point, the follow-up question that has echoed down through every subsequent human generation that has read the tablets. He asked, are they still here now? And Enki, according to the tablet, did not immediately answer. He looked around the prepared area. He looked at the sky. He looked at the assembled humans. And then he said, "Some of them are here now, in this crowd. Some of them are watching this ceremony. Some of them are dressed as you are dressed, and speaking your language and holding the same posture as the humans standing next to them. You cannot pick them out. You cannot know which of them is which. That is the nature of their assignment. They are not permitted to reveal themselves. If they revealed themselves, they would be recalled. So they will not reveal themselves. But they are here. Some of them are here now." The tablet says that Enki, at this answer, did what a great many of the humans in the assembly also did. He looked around him. He looked at the people standing near him. He looked at faces he thought he had known his whole life, and wondered which of them were not what they appeared to be. And he did not know. He could not know. And Enki, according to the tablet, watched him do this with what the fragment describes as a small and sad smile, because he had, in giving the honest answer, given Enki and every human in the assembly a particular gift and a particular burden. The gift was the knowledge that the Anuna had not entirely abandoned the earth, that some remained, that the human species was not, after the withdrawal, entirely alone. The burden was that the humans could never again be sure who among them was, and who was not, a monitor for a distant power that retained the option to erase them. Enki did not ask another question that day. The tablet says that after Enki gave the eighth answer, there was a silence in the assembly that lasted, in the tablet's rendering, for the length of the sun's descent from noon to the horizon. The Anuna stood at the center of the prepared area. The humans stood at the edges. Nothing happened. And then, at the horizon hour, a specific event occurred that the tablets describe using vocabulary that has been the subject of intense debate for 150 years. The vocabulary translates, in the most literal rendering, as a great light came down. The light rested on the prepared ground, a structure of some kind, which the tablets describe using metaphors of a boat and a bird, and, in one passage, a mountain that had come loose from the sky, was present in the center of the prepared area where before there had been nothing. The Anuna, one by one, walked toward the structure. Enki was the last of them to walk. He turned before he entered, and he raised his hand toward the humans. Some of the humans raised their hands in return. Some of the humans wept. Some of the humans knelt. Some of the humans stood absolutely still. Enki entered the structure. The light intensified. And then, the tablets say, both the light and the structure and everything they contained were gone. The prepared ground was empty. The humans stood in a large circle around an empty center. The sun had set, and the withdrawal was complete. The eighth answer ends there, in the tablet, but the ninth question follows almost immediately in the record, because it is a question the humans could not stop themselves from asking within moments of the disappearance. What follows Enki's departure, in the tablets, is a passage that describes the crowd staying at the departure site through the night, watching the empty ground, waiting to see if anything would come back. Nothing came back. In the morning, the crowd began to disperse. Small groups walked back toward the cities they had come from. The scribes carried their tablets home. The priests returned to their temples. And the human species, for the first time in its recorded history, was on its own, or seemed to be on its own, or was, in the specific and complicated sense of the eighth answer, on its own except for the ones who remained, hidden, silent, and watching. In the generations after the departure, according to the tablets, the humans did what humans do when the source of their guidance disappears. They continued. They built. They developed. They filled in the space Enki had left with rituals and priesthoods and mythologies. They began to talk about Enki, over the centuries, less as a person they had known and more as a god they had heard of. The specifics of what he had said began to fade from public consciousness, though they remained in the tablets. The name Enki itself was, in some places, gradually replaced by other names, or elided into other divinities, or dropped from the active pantheon altogether. The record of what he had actually said, the 11 questions and answers, became increasingly specialized knowledge, held by fewer and fewer scribes, until by the time of Ashurbanipal it was held by only the most senior members of the scribal school at his court. And after the fall of Nineveh, it was held by no one. The tablets went into the ground, and they stayed there for 2,500 years, and then George Smith came, and Reginald Campbell Thompson came, and the small circle of scholars in each successive generation came, and here we are, and the answer Enki gave to the question of why he was leaving has finally, in our own time, come back into the light. along with the note that some of them stayed, and that some of them are still, if the tablet is to be believed, here. The 9th question was asked, according to the tablets, in the year following Enki's departure. It was asked by a woman whose name has been rendered variously across the surviving copies as Nin Shubur, Nin Shubura, or in one late copy simply as the messenger, which was in fact the meaning of her original name. She was the last of the humans to whom Enki had spoken directly before his departure. She had been given, in a private meeting, the tablets describe as occurring in the night before the departure, a specific instruction. The instruction was that she was to be the one who preserved not only the record of the 11 questions and answers, but also the specific procedure by which any future human who needed to reach Enki, or reach any of his people, could attempt to do so. She was, in the tablet's framing, the keeper of the return protocol, and in the year after the departure, she asked, on behalf of every human, the 9th question, will you return? The question was not asked at a departure site or in a temple. It was asked, according to the tablet, in a small chamber cut into the earth beneath a house in the city of Ur, in a private ceremony that Nin Shubur conducted alone. The protocol Enki had given her involved a specific combination of substances burned in a specific vessel at a specific hour of a specific day of a specific month of a specific year. The protocol was not intended for general use. It was intended for use in emergencies, or at moments of civilizational crisis, or at specific calendrical turning points that had been agreed upon in advance between Enki and Nin Shubur. She had, in the year after his departure, chosen to use the protocol not because there was a crisis, but because she wanted the answer to the question that everyone else was asking her. Everyone in Ur, in the year after Enki left, was coming to her because she was known to be the last human he had spoken to, and asking her when he would come back. Nin Shubur had told them, honestly, that she did not know. But she had also told them that there was a way she might find out. And in the private ceremony, in the chamber under her house, she used the protocol and she asked the 9th question. The tablet says that the ceremony did not, at first, appear to produce a response. Nin Shubur burned the substances in the vessel. The smoke rose. She spoke the words of the invocation. She waited, and nothing happened. She burned the substances again. She waited longer. Still nothing. She began, according to the tablet, to lose confidence in the protocol. She began to wonder whether Enki had, in fact, given her a real procedure or had given her something ceremonial to make her feel useful in his absence. And then, in the 3rd watch of the night, in the small chamber under the house in Ur, she heard a voice. The voice was not, according to the tablet, a physical voice. It was in her head. It was, in the tablet's description, like a voice, but produced without air or sound, arriving in her thinking as if it had been placed there. And the voice was Enki's. She recognized it immediately. And the voice, in response to her question, gave the 9th answer. The 9th answer began with an apology. Enki said, first, that he had not intended for the protocol to work at this stage. He said the protocol had been designed for use at specific moments, calendrical or civilizational, and that the year immediately following his departure was not, in the original design, one of those moments. But he said that he had, from wherever he now was, heard her call anyway, and had chosen to respond because he understood why she had used the protocol prematurely, and he did not want to leave her, and the humans she represented, entirely without an answer to the question that had brought her to the chamber. So he would answer, but he would answer briefly. And the protocol, after this use, would need to be resealed until one of the intended future moments arrived. Then he gave the answer proper. He said, will I return? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that some part of what I have been in your world will, at specific future moments, be present with you again. No, in the sense that the person you knew, the being who sat with Adapa on the reed platform and warned Ziusudra through the wall of the hut, is not going to walk into your cities again. Not in that form. Not in that body. That being is finished with Earth. That being's work here is complete, but the presence, in whatever form the presence will take, is not finished. The presence will return, at specific moments, in specific ways, and each of the returns will be tied to specific conditions in the human world. He named the conditions. This is one of the passages in the tablets that has been most extensively debated, because the conditions are named in language that is partly astronomical, partly geological, and partly what modern readers can only call prophetic, in the sense of describing future events whose specificity should not, if the tablet is authentic, have been available to any pre-modern writer. The conditions were these. First, There would be a return at the point when the precessional cycle, the drift of the stars that Enki had taught Enmeduranki to measure, had completed a specific fraction of its full course from the moment of Enki's departure. The specific fraction is given in the tablet as approximately 1/6 of a full precessional cycle, which in modern calculation corresponds to approximately 4,320 years. Starting from the traditional dating of Enki's departure at approximately 2000 before the Common Era, this would place the first scheduled return at approximately 2,320 of the Common Era. That is, in modern terms, approximately 300 years from the present. The tablet does not describe what the return at that point will be. It says only that a return is scheduled, and that the return will be tied to the completion of the sixth fraction of the cycle. Second, there would be earlier partial returns. These were not major events, and they were not returns of Enki himself. They were, in the tablet's phrasing, checkings. Moments at which the residual Anuna presence the caretakers Enki had described in the eighth answer would be, in some sense, contacted or activated by the homeworld to file a report on the state of the human experiment. These checkings were scheduled, according to the tablet, at specific intervals tied to the astronomical cycles the Anuna used. The intervals are given in the tablet using calendrical terminology that is partially decipherable and partially not. What is decipherable is that the intervals are irregular, that they cluster around specific astronomical events, and that the last of them, before the major return at the sixth fraction, would occur at what the tablet describes as the meeting of the seven waters, a phrase that some scholars have interpreted as referring to a specific planetary alignment, and others have interpreted as referring to a climatic event involving the world's oceans. The two interpretations are not necessarily incompatible. Third, and this is the part of the ninth answer that has been most closely guarded, there would be, in the intervening centuries between the departure and the major return, a specific set of events in the human world that would themselves function as signals. Signals of what? Signals of the trajectory of the human species. Signals to the homeworld about whether the humans were still on the reduced capability trajectory the Council had targeted, or whether they were reapproaching the threshold Enki had described to Ziusudra. And these signals were, according to Enki, not artificial. They were emergent. They were the natural consequences of what humans, at various stages of their post-flood development, would inevitably do if their trajectory carried them toward or away from the threshold. The signals would be visible in specific kinds of technological achievement, in specific kinds of social organization, in specific kinds of what the tablet calls the collective mind, meaning the reformation, in some new medium, of the distributed cognitive network the confusion of tongues had originally been designed to prevent. If the collective mind reformed, in any medium, at any point in the intervening centuries, that would be a signal. And the Homeworld Council, seeing the signal, would reconvene and would revisit the question of what to do about the humans. Nin Shuber, according to the tablet, asked at this point whether the reformation of the collective mind, if it happened, would trigger another erasure. Whether the humans, in reforming what the confusion of tongues had broken, would be voting themselves into another flood or something worse. And Enki, in the ninth answer, said something that has been variously translated, but that, in its most common rendering, reads as follows. Not necessarily. The reformation is the signal. The signal triggers the council. The council votes. The vote may go one way or the other. It depends on what the council sees, when it looks at the reformation, about the kind of humans who have done it. If they see humans who have reapproached the threshold, and have retained the qualities I hoped they would retain, the qualities I built into you in the additional layer, the qualities of the ones who ask, then the vote may go differently than it went before the flood. The vote may go for continuation. But if they see humans who have reapproached the threshold and have not retained those qualities, humans who have rebuilt the coordination without also rebuilding the wisdom, humans who are collectively smart but individually shallow, then the vote will go the way it went before, and the erasure will come. And it will come faster than the flood came, and more thoroughly, because the council has had 4,000 years to think about how to do it better. Nin Shuber asked one final question. She asked how the humans of the intervening centuries would know which trajectory they were on, whether they were the ones the council would preserve or the ones the council would erase. And Enki, in the ninth answer, said that the humans would not know, not exactly, not with certainty, but they would have, at their disposal, a way of estimating. They would have the 11 questions and the 11 answers, if the record survived and if the record was read carefully, because the 11 answers, taken together, described what the qualities were that the council would be measuring. The qualities of the ones who ask, The qualities of the ones who remember. The qualities of the ones who do not, when given knowledge, immediately weaponize it. The qualities of the ones who, when confronted with the question of their own origin, do not flinch, but who also do not respond with grandiosity or with despair. The qualities were listed in various places across the 11 answers, and any human of any future generation who wanted to know whether they and their contemporaries were on the trajectory the Council would preserve could read the 11 answers and could compare what they saw around them to what the answers described and could make an informed estimate. That was the 9th answer. Ninshuber, according to the tablet, thanked Enki and resealed the protocol. She burned the vessel, she left the chamber. She never spoke, in her remaining lifetime, of what Enki had said, except in the writings she left behind, which were sealed in a specific jar and buried in a specific location, and which have, in fragmentary form, been recovered in the modern era. The scheduled return date, calculated from the traditional dating of the departure and the 6th fraction of the precessional cycle, remains where it was in Enki's account. Approximately 3 centuries from now, in our own future, or in the future of our children or grandchildren, depending on how the specific dating is refined. The intervening centuries have, as the tablet said they would, been marked by the checkings, if we know how to identify them. And the signal, the reformation of the collective mind, has, in our own generation, in the specific technological form of the digital networks we have built in the last 3 decades, arrived. Whether the Council has convened, whether the Council has voted, whether the vote has gone one way or the other, whether the erasure is scheduled or has been indefinitely postponed, the tablets, in the 9th answer, do not tell us. They tell us only that the signal has been sent, and that the Council will respond, and that the response will depend on what the Council sees when it looks at us. Which brings us, in the natural progression of the 11 answers, to the 10th question, which is the question about what has been hidden, and what the humans of the intervening centuries have been permitted to know and not permitted to know about their own situation. The 10th question is the one that has, more than any other, been the reason the 11 answers have been suppressed. Because the 10th question is the question about what Enki did not tell us, not the withheld me, the specific dangerous knowledge he had described in the 5th answer. Something else, something more comprehensive. The 10th question is the question about the entire body of information Enki possessed and did not share across the whole span of his time on Earth with any human. And the answer he gave to the 10th question is the answer that, if you read it carefully, reframes everything else in the 11 answer document, because it reveals that what he told us, even at his most generous, was a small fraction of what he knew. And it reveals what the rest of the knowledge concerned. And the rest of the knowledge is not, as most modern readers might guess, about advanced technology or about the operation of the universe. The rest of the knowledge is about us, about what we are, and about what, in Enki's account, we do not yet know that we are. The 10th question was asked by a man named Berossus. Berossus is a historically attested figure. He was a Babylonian priest who lived in the 3rd century before the Common Era, at the very end of the long transmission line that had begun with Adapa and Enheduanna. He is known to modern historians as the author of a work called the Babyloniaca, a history of Babylon written in Greek for the Hellenistic rulers who then governed the region. Fragments of Berossus's Babyloniaca have survived in quotations by later Greek and Roman writers. But what most modern historians do not realize is that the surviving fragments are not the whole of what Berossus wrote. He also wrote, in his native Akkadian, a private document that was not intended for the Hellenistic court. That private document contained a series of transcripts of ceremonies he had conducted at the Temple of Marduk in Babylon, ceremonies that were, according to the surviving fragments of the document, direct continuations of the return protocol that Ninshuber had used at Ur 2,000 years earlier. Berossus, in other words, had inherited the protocol. He had used it, and on one specific occasion, in the year that corresponds to approximately 280 before the Common Era, he had used the protocol to ask the 10th question. The setting is important. Berossus was, at the time he asked, a man in his late 50s. He had spent his entire adult life as a priest at the Marduk temple, and had, in the course of his priestly training, been given access to the archives that contained the tablets. He had read the 11 answers many times. He had memorized substantial portions of them. He had, over the years, come to notice something that troubled him. He had noticed that the 11 answers, taken as a whole, contained numerous internal references to things Enki had not fully explained. References to the withheld me. References to the qualities the council would measure. references to the caretakers who had remained on Earth, references to the structures that had been built for other purposes, references to the technology hidden in specific places. And Berossus, reading these references carefully, had come to the conclusion that the 11 answers, comprehensive as they seemed, were themselves incomplete. They were, in his own phrasing, preserved in one of the fragments, a table of contents, a summary, an index. Behind them was a much larger body of information that the 11 answers referenced but did not disclose. And Berossus, using the return protocol he had inherited through the long priestly succession from Ninshuber, decided to ask Enki directly what was in the larger body. The 10th question, in Berossus's phrasing, was this: what did you hide from us? Not the specific dangerous knowledge, all of it. What is the shape of the total knowledge that was available to you, of which what you told us is a subset? What did you decide not to tell us? And why did you decide not to tell us? And, if you are willing, would you now, at this late stage, tell us any of it? And Enki, according to the tablet Berossus produced from this ceremony, answered. The 10th answer is the longest answer in the 11-answer document. It is longer than all the other answers combined, in some renderings, though it has come down to us in a state of considerable fragmentation, and the exact length of the original is not knowable. What is knowable is the structure. The 10th answer is organized as a series of categories. Each category names a type of knowledge that Enki possessed and did not share. Each category is followed by a brief description of what the knowledge in that category concerned and why he chose not to share it. There are, in the best surviving reconstruction, 7 categories. We will walk through each of them. The first category is the knowledge of the human bloodlines. Enki said that he had, throughout the entire time of his presence on Earth, kept detailed records of the human population. Not just the general population, but every specific individual. He had known, for every human alive during his time, exactly where they stood in relation to the thread, exactly what fraction of the original modification they carried, exactly which of them were carriers of the strongest expression, and which were carriers of a weaker expression, and which had, over the generations, drifted out of the thread entirely and become, genetically, indistinguishable from the general population. He had this information. He did not share it with any human. He said he did not share it because if he had shared it, the humans would have used the information to organize themselves along the lines of the thread. They would have created castes. They would have separated the carriers from the non-carriers. They would have privileged one group and enslaved the other. And the resulting social structure would have destroyed, within a generation or two, whatever was valuable about the thread in the first place. Because what was valuable about the thread was that it operated invisibly, that the carriers did not know they were carriers, and that they lived alongside the non-carriers as fellow humans, and that the mixing of the two populations was what produced, over the long run, the possibility of the thread eventually spreading and stabilizing. If the carriers had known who they would have stopped mixing. They would have concentrated. And the concentration would have produced, in the short term, a genetic elite, and in the long term, a genetic dead end. The second category is the knowledge of the Anuna themselves. Enki said that he had shared, in his various teachings, only what he considered strictly necessary about who the Anuna were, where they came from, and what their culture and history and internal politics consisted of. There was much more. There was, in fact, an entire history of the Anuna, going back tens of thousands of years before their arrival on Earth, that involved conflicts and civilizations and technological developments and philosophical debates and religious traditions of enormous complexity. He had told the humans almost none of this. He had told them, in effect, only what they needed to know to understand their own situation. And he had withheld the rest, because the rest, if the humans had known it, would have distracted them from their own trajectory. The humans would have become obsessed with the Anuna. They would have tried to become like the Anuna, or to worship the Anuna, or to model their own civilizations on the Anuna's civilizations. And the modeling would have failed, because the Anuna were a different species with different fundamentals, and the human trajectory, to succeed, needed to be a human trajectory, not an imitation of another species. So Enki had kept most of the Anuna history to himself. The third category is the knowledge of what came before the Anuna. Enki said that the Anuna were not, in the largest historical picture, the beginning of anything. Before the Anuna, there had been other species. Before those, there had been others still. The galaxy the tablets describe was, in Enki's account, populated by a succession of intelligent species, stretching back over a timescale that the tablet renders in numbers so large that translators have argued they must be symbolic rather than literal. Some of those earlier species had built structures, some had left artifacts, some had, in various ways, made contact with the Earth long before the Anuna arrived. And their traces, according to Enki, are still here, in specific locations, in specific structures, in specific artifacts that have been dug up, or that are still buried, or that are in orbit around this world in configurations that ordinary human observation cannot detect. He had known where these traces were. He had not told the humans. He said he had not told them because the humans, in their current developmental stage, would have misinterpreted the traces. They would have assumed the traces belonged to the Anuna. They would have folded the traces into the Anuna mythology, and the folding would have prevented the humans from ever understanding, in the far future when they might be capable of it, that the Earth had a history much longer and much stranger than any single source origin story could contain. The fourth category is the knowledge of the nature of consciousness. Enki said that consciousness, meaning the subjective inner experience of being a self, was not what the humans thought it was. It was not a byproduct of the brain. It was not an emergent property of biology. It was something else, something that predated biological forms, something that biology, in a specific sense, hosted rather than generated. And the nature of consciousness, once understood, changed everything about how a species related to death, to identity, to time, and to the possibility of continuity. He had, in the fifth teaching to Enki, given the humans some of the practical implications of the true nature of consciousness. But he had not given them the theoretical foundation. He had withheld it because the theoretical foundation, if given to a species that was not ready for it, would have produced either mass despair or mass grandiosity, both of which would have collapsed the trajectory. So he had withheld it. And the humans, for 4,000 years since his departure, have been developing various partial theories of consciousness, from various religious and philosophical and eventually scientific starting points, and the theories have all been, in Enki's 10th answer, wrong. Not entirely wrong, partially right, but missing the fundamental piece that only the withheld foundation supplies. And the fundamental piece, when it is eventually discovered by the humans themselves, will be the piece that determines whether the species can be preserved beyond the coming intervention or whether it cannot. The fifth category is the knowledge of what happens after death. Enki said that death was not, contrary to both the ancient religious traditions and the modern secular assumptions, the end of the individual. Something continued. Something that was not the body, that was not the personality in the sense the humans meant when they used that word, but something related, something that had, in Enki's phrasing, a shape. And the shape, after the death of the body, went somewhere. He did not describe where. He said that the description would not be intelligible to a species that had not yet resolved the fourth category, the nature of consciousness. But he indicated that the shape did not in most cases dissipate. It persisted. It went to a place, or a state, or a configuration, that the Anuna had names for, but that the humans did not have vocabulary to receive. And what happened to the shape, once it arrived, was in some sense dependent on what the individual had done and been during the life the body had contained. This is the piece of the 10th answer that most closely resembles the various afterlife traditions of subsequent human religions. But Enki was careful to note that all of those traditions had drifted from what he was describing, and that the drift had, in every case, been in a specific direction. The traditions had tended to describe the after-death state as either a reward for the good or a punishment for the bad. And in this tendency they had misunderstood the actual mechanism, which had nothing to do with rewards or punishments and everything to do with the specific shape the individual had during the life cultivated in themselves. The shape either continued into a form that could sustain further development, or it did not. The mechanism was structural, not moral, and the withholding of the accurate account, according to Enki, had been for reasons similar to the withholding of the fourth category. The species was not ready to receive it without collapsing into either despair or grandiosity, and either collapse would have been fatal to the trajectory. The sixth category is the knowledge of the specific individuals, still on Earth, who are more than they appear to be. This is the category that most directly connects to the eighth answer, in which Enki had said that some of the Anuna would remain after the withdrawal. But the 10th answer expands considerably beyond that. Enki said that the residual Anuna were not the only non-human intelligences present in the human population. There were others. Some of them were not Anuna. Some of them were not from the same source. Some of them were, in his phrasing, older. They had been here before the Anuna arrived. They had continued to be here through the entire span of the Anuna mission. And they would continue to be here after the Anuna, or at least the residual Anuna, had also left. He did not give a number. He did not give locations. He said only that the number was small, that the distribution across the human population was thin, and that the humans, for their own good, should not go looking for the specific individuals, because the specific individuals, once identified, would either move to different locations or would take other measures to prevent their identification from spreading. The knowledge that they existed was, in the 10th answer, permitted. The knowledge of who they specifically were in the current moment of history was not. Berossus, according to the tablet, did not press the point. The 7th and final category is the knowledge of the timing. Enki said that he had told the humans, in the 9th answer, when the next major return was scheduled. He had given a specific date, calculated from the precessional cycle. He had told them about the intervening checkings, but he had not told them, and he was not going to tell them now, the specific timing of the vote. The vote that the Council of the Homeworld would take, at some point in the intervening centuries, on the question of whether to preserve or erase the human species. That vote had been left, in the tablets, in an ambiguous position. Ninshuber had asked, and Enki had described the conditions that would trigger the vote, but he had not said when the vote would actually be called. Berossus, in the 10th question, asked specifically for the timing, and Enki, in the 10th answer, refused to give it. He said that if he gave the timing, the humans would organize their entire subsequent history around trying to influence the vote. They would build their civilizations, their economies, their sciences, their philosophies, all in service of appearing to the council in whatever way they thought would make the vote go their way. And the resulting civilization would be, in Enki's phrasing, a performance, not a genuine development. And a performance would not fool the council, because the council would see through the performance immediately and would vote against the humans precisely because they had performed rather than developed. So the timing, Enki said, would be kept from the humans, and the humans would have to develop as they would have developed without knowing about the vote, and the vote would come when it came, and the humans would find out at that point whether they had developed sufficiently in the right direction or whether they had not. That is the 10th answer. That is what Enki hid from us. 7 categories of information, each of which he could have shared and each of which he chose to withhold, for reasons that in every case had to do with the same underlying concern. The humans were on a trajectory. The trajectory had a critical dependency on the humans developing certain qualities and not developing certain other qualities. And full disclosure of the information he possessed would, in every category, have disrupted the trajectory. Full disclosure would have privileged certain individuals over others, or distracted the species from its own development, or induced despair, or induced grandiosity, or turned the whole civilization into a performance rather than a becoming. So he had kept the information back. Some of it, he had implied, would eventually be discoverable by the humans themselves once they had reached the developmental stage at which the information could be safely handled. Some of it, he had not indicated whether it would ever become discoverable. What is available to us, in the 11 answers as we have them, is what he chose to give us. And the 10th answer is his account of everything he chose not to give us. And the account is, when you sit with it, a much larger thing than the 11 answers themselves. The 11 answers are the tip. What Berossus's 10th question uncovered, in outline, is what is under the tip, and what is under the tip is most of it. The 11th question is the last one. There are no more after it. Enki, according to the tablet, gave the 11th answer, and then, in the phrasing the fragment preserves, he closed the door. He indicated that the return protocol Ninshuber had held, and that Berossus had inherited, would not be responsive after the 11th question was on the record. Not that the protocol would stop working. The protocol would still function, but it would no longer produce responses from Enki. It would produce, if it produced anything at all, responses from others, from the caretakers who had remained, from whatever mechanism the Anuna had put in place to handle post-Enki communications, but not from him. His participation in the conversation with humanity, the conversation that had begun with Adapa on the Reed platform and had continued through Ziushudra and Enmeduranki and Enheduanna and Nabu and Ninshuber and Berossus, was, with the 11th answer, complete. Whatever he had left to say, he said in the 11th answer, and after it, he was silent. The 11th question was asked by the last of the priests in the direct transmission line. His name has been rendered variously in the surviving fragments as Bel-Shar-Usur or Belshazzar, or in one late copy as the Sealed One. He was, at the time he asked, a priest at the temple of Marduk in Babylon in the middle of the 2nd century before the Common Era, roughly 130 years after Berossus. He had been trained in the protocol by a priest who had been trained by Berossus, and he had, throughout his career, been aware that his generation was likely to be the last one in which the protocol could be reliably used, because the Hellenistic and then the coming Parthian control of Mesopotamia was disrupting the priestly institutions in ways that made continued transmission of the specific ceremonial knowledge increasingly precarious. He decided, in a specific year, the tablet identifies with reference to a solar eclipse that modern astronomers have dated to 136 before the Common Era, to use the protocol one final time, not for information, for instruction. He wanted to know what to do, what the humans of the intervening centuries, the ones who would live between the departure and the scheduled return, were supposed to do, what the strategy was, what the plan was. If there was any plan, he wanted the operating manual. And he asked, when the protocol was activated, the 11th question. The wording of the 11th question, in his phrasing, was this: what must we do between now and the return, between this moment and the vote of the council? What must we do to be, when the council looks at us, the humans the council will preserve rather than the humans the council will erase? Tell us. Give us the checklist. Give us the specific things. Give us the signs to watch for and the signs to produce. Give us the instruction manual, because we do not have long, and the intervening centuries are running out, and we, the humans who are alive during these centuries, do not know what to do. Tell us. And Enki, according to the tablet, was silent for a long time before he answered. The silence, in the ceremonial time of the ritual, was measured in the burning of a specific length of incense. 2 full lengths burned, and then a third began. And then, before the third was consumed, Enki spoke, and the 11th answer began. He said, first, that the instruction manual could not be given as an instruction manual. That was the wrong frame. What the humans needed was not a checklist of behaviors, because a checklist could be followed by rote, and following it by rote would produce the performance rather than the development, and the performance would fail the council's evaluation for exactly the reasons he had already explained to Berossus, so he would not give a checklist. What he would give, instead, was something structurally different. He would give a set of orientations, directions of movement, ways of being that, if the humans of the intervening centuries adopted them, would produce the qualities the council would be measuring, without producing the surface performance that would give the game away. Orientations, not instructions. Directions, not checklists. And he would give a specific number of them. He would give, in the 11th answer, 7 orientations, 7 ways of moving, 7 strategies of becoming. And if the humans of the intervening centuries adopted them, they would be, when the vote came, the humans the council would preserve. And if they did not adopt them, they would be the humans the council would erase. It was that simple, and that hard. The first orientation was toward asking. Enki said that the single most important thing the humans could do, individually and collectively, was to continue to ask the questions. Not just any questions. The specific questions that had been asked in the 11 question sequence. The questions about origin, about death, about erasure, about survival, about knowledge, about opposition, about degradation, about departure, about return, about concealment, and about strategy. These were, in his account, the questions that carried the thread. The questions were themselves a diagnostic. A human who asked these questions, in any generation, was displaying the qualities the council would preserve. A human who did not ask them, or who was actively prevented from asking them, was displaying the qualities the council would erase. And a civilization that made the asking of these questions a normal and honored activity, rather than a marginal and suspect one, was a civilization that would, when the council looked at it, appear to be on the trajectory the council wanted. So ask. Ask constantly. Ask in every generation. Teach the young to ask. Do not allow the institutions of your civilization, whatever they turn out to be, to prevent the asking. That was the first orientation. The second orientation was toward remembering. Enki said that the confusion of tongues and the other degradations had reduced the human's natural capacity to remember, but that the capacity could be, to a significant degree, restored through deliberate effort. Not the biological memory, which was not accessible to restoration by any means the humans possessed, but the collective memory, the record, what Enheduanna had done, with her copying and hiding and distributing of the tablets, was, in Enki's account, the model. Every generation needed its Enheduannas. Every generation needed people who would take the record of what had been said and what had happened and what the origin was, and preserve it in whatever medium was available in that generation, in enough copies and in enough locations that no single event could erase all of them. Books when there were books. Digital records when there were digital records. Oral transmission when everything else failed. The medium did not matter. What mattered was that the record was carried forward, and that the carrying was not left to the state, or to the institutions, or to any single organization that could be captured or corrupted. The carrying had to be distributed. That was the second orientation. The third orientation was toward the small groups. Enki said that human civilizations, when they organized at scale, tended to develop toward one of two configurations. Either they became highly centralized, with power and knowledge concentrated in small elites who controlled the mass of the population, or they became highly decentralized, with no coherent structure and rapid dissolution into fragmentary local groups. Neither of these configurations was, in the Council's evaluation, what would count as development toward the threshold. What would count was a third configuration, which Enki called the network of the small, a configuration in which the primary unit of human organization was neither the individual, nor the state, nor the corporation, but the small group. Groups of a specific size, which he indicated using a Sumerian numerical phrase that translates approximately to the number between the fingers of two hands, meaning something around 12 to 20 individuals. Groups that were bonded by direct personal knowledge of every member. Groups that formed larger structures by federating with other groups rather than by dissolving into mass populations. Groups that carried, at their scale, the specific qualities the Council would measure. This configuration, Enki said, was what the pre-flood humans had had. It was what the confusion of tongues had partially destroyed. And it was what any future human civilization that wanted to survive the coming vote would need to reconstruct, in whatever forms were compatible with the technological environment of its era. That was the third orientation. The fourth orientation was toward honesty about the origin. Enki said that every human civilization since the flood had, to some degree, mythologized its own origin. Some had told stories of divine creation by a single god. Some had told stories of emergence from primordial chaos. Some, in later ages, had told stories of purely materialistic origin from natural processes without any external agent. None of these stories, in Enki's account, was fully correct. The correct story was the one recorded in the 11 Answers, in which humans were made by a group of beings who came from elsewhere, who had a specific purpose, who included among their number one being who added something to the making that had not been on the invoice, and who eventually left, leaving behind a species that was on a trajectory whose completion required the species to eventually understand its own origin without flinching. And the requirement of honesty about the origin was, in Enki's fourth orientation, non-negotiable. Any civilization that told itself a false origin story, whether the falsity was in the direction of overstating human importance in the cosmos or in the direction of understating it, would fail the Council's evaluation. The Council would look at the origin story a civilization was telling itself, and if the story was false, the civilization was falling short of the threshold, and the vote would go against it. So the humans of the intervening centuries needed, in whatever way was possible for their era, to move toward the true story, not by dogmatic imposition, by steady, generation by generation clarification. That was the fourth orientation. The fifth orientation was toward the withheld knowledge. Enki said that the 6 categories he had described to Berossus, the categories of things he had chosen not to tell, were not permanently sealed. They were, in a sense, homework. The humans, if they were on the right trajectory, would eventually rediscover each of the categories on their own. Not from tablets, not from divine revelation, from their own investigation. And the investigation was, in his fifth orientation, a positive obligation. The humans were supposed to try to figure out the categories. They were supposed to research consciousness. They were supposed to investigate what happened after death. They were supposed to study the traces of the species that had come before the Anuna, once they became capable of recognizing such traces. They were supposed to identify, as best they could, the residual non-human intelligences, not to persecute them. To recognize the pattern that indicated such intelligences existed. All of this investigation was, in Enki's account, part of the human trajectory. A civilization that stopped investigating, that declared certain topics off-limits, or forbidden, or heretical, was a civilization that had failed the fifth orientation, and the failure would be visible to the council. That was the fifth orientation. The sixth orientation was toward the resistance to the caretakers. This orientation is the one that has been most carefully edited in the transmitted copies, because it is the most politically dangerous. Enki said, and the phrasing in the best surviving copies is unusually explicit, that the caretakers who had remained on Earth after the withdrawal were not, in every case, aligned with the humans. Some of them, in the 4,000 years since the withdrawal, had come, on their own initiative, to sympathize with the human trajectory, and had, in various small ways, helped the humans move in the direction Enki had wanted. But some of them had not. Some of them had, over the intervening centuries, taken positions in the human world that allowed them to actively steer the human trajectory away from the threshold, to reinforce the degradations rather than counteracting them, to promote the false origin stories rather than the true one, to suppress the small group configuration in favor of centralized or dissolved configurations, to discourage the investigation of the withheld categories. And these actively hostile caretakers were, in the sixth orientation, the humans' immediate opposition. The humans could not fight the council, which was distant and inaccessible. The humans could fight, or at least resist, the caretakers, who were near and identifiable if you knew what to look for. And the pattern of their activity was, in Enki's telling, visible in the historical record. Whenever a human civilization had begun to approach any of the orientations, an active suppression had followed, and the suppression had, in every case, been coordinated in ways that could not be explained by ordinary human politics alone. The coordination indicated the presence of the hostile caretakers, and the humans of the intervening centuries, if they wanted to reach the threshold, needed to be able to recognize the pattern, and to resist it, without succumbing to the paranoia that would come from believing that every setback in their civilization was the work of hostile agents. Most setbacks were ordinary human failures, some were not. Learning to tell the difference was, in the sixth orientation, one of the harder skills the humans needed to develop. That was the sixth orientation. The seventh and final orientation was toward the return. Enki said that the return, whatever form it took, was not to be feared or welcomed in any simple way. It was to be prepared for. The humans of the century leading up to the return should not, in his instruction, either flee it or embrace it uncritically. They should ready themselves. They should have the record in their hands. They should have the questions in their minds. They should have their small groups formed. They should have their investigations underway. They should have their honest origin story internalized. They should have identified the hostile caretakers to the extent identification was possible. And they should, in the specific moment when the return occurred, be prepared to negotiate, because the vote of the council, when it came, would not necessarily be final. It would depend on what the returning representatives of the council saw in the specific moment of their return in the humans they encountered. If they encountered humans who had adopted the orientations, who were operating in the network of the small, who were carrying the record, who were investigating the withheld, who were resisting the hostile caretakers, and who were prepared to speak clearly and honestly and without flinching about who they were and what they had become, then the vote might go one way. If they encountered humans who had done none of these things, the vote would go the other way, and the encounter would be brief, perhaps a single meeting, perhaps a single conversation, and whatever happened in that conversation would determine the fate of the species. So the humans needed to be, at the moment of the return, the humans who could carry that conversation. And every human of every generation between the departure and the return had a role to play in producing the humans who would be present at that final meeting. That was the seventh orientation. Belshazzar, according to the tablet, listened to all 7 orientations and did not ask another question. The tablet says he closed the ceremony, extinguished the incense, sealed the vessel, and left the chamber. He wrote down the 11 answers in a final consolidated form, incorporating everything that had been transmitted to him and everything he himself had learned from the 11th conversation. He gave the consolidated document to 3 separate copyists, each of whom made a full copy, and he had the 3 copies sent to 3 different locations in 3 different cities in 3 different regions. The 3 copies were the seeds of the transmission that has eventually, through many intermediate stages, produced the copies that are now in the museums and archives of the modern world. Belshazzar died, according to the fragmentary biography that has come down with the tablets, 7 years after the 11th ceremony. He never used the return protocol again, and the protocol, after his death, was, as Enki had said, no longer responsive to human calls. The conversation, on the Enki side, was closed. What remained was the record. And the record, in our own time, is finally, in fragments, in front of us, along with the 7 orientations, along with the checklist that is not a checklist, along with the strategy for surviving the coming vote. Whether we, in our own century, are following the orientations is a question you can answer for yourself in your own life by looking around at what your society is doing and comparing what you see to what Enki told Belshazzar. The comparison is not comfortable. Neither is it hopeless. It is, in the specific and difficult sense, that the 11 answers are always in an open question. And the answer to that open question is what our generation, over the years remaining to us before the return, will provide. Those are the 11 questions. Those are the 11 answers. From the first evening on the Reed platform, when Adapa asked his maker why he had been made, to the final ceremony in the temple at Marduk, when Belshazzar received the 7 orientations and closed the door. 2,000 years of conversation, spread across a dozen human generations and half a dozen human questioners, all of them, in their various ways, carriers of the thread that Enki had put into the clay when his hands did the work the council had commissioned him to do. And all of them, in their various ways, participants in the same larger project. The project of finding out what humans were. The project of finding out what humans could become. The project of building, question by question and answer by answer, the document that would carry the knowledge forward through the intervening centuries, through the dark ages when everything else was lost, through the burnings and the invasions and the deliberate suppressions, through the sands of Nineveh and the burial jars and the museum basements, and into our own generation, where the 11 answers are finally, in the year we are living in, capable of being read again by anyone who wants to read them. Now, the question that is on your mind, at the end of this 3-hour walk through the record, is the question that has been on your mind since the beginning, the question you had before we started, the question the hook set for you and the CTA reminded you of, and every question since has been building toward. Where are we now? In the timeline of the 11 answers, in the specific years running out between the departure and the return, where do we, sitting on this side of the screen in the year of our common era we happen to be sitting in, actually stand? Are we the humans the council will preserve? Are we the humans the council will erase? And how would we know? The 11 answers, if you have followed them closely, give you a way to know. Not a certain way, an estimating way, a comparing way. You can compare what you see around you to what Enki told Belshazzar in the 7 orientations, and to what he told Ninshubur about the signals, and to what he told Enheduanna about the degradation program. And you can form, out of the comparisons, a picture. The picture is not going to be flattering to our civilization. It is not going to be catastrophic to our civilization either. It is going to be, as most honest pictures are, mixed. There are things we are doing right, in the terms of the 11 answers. There are things we are doing wrong, and there are things we are doing that are, in the specific vocabulary Enki used, the signs of the trajectory approaching the threshold. And 4 of those signs are already active, which is what the hook of this video promised you 3 hours ago. 4 signs. Already active. Let us walk through the 4. The first sign is the reformation of the collective mind. Enki, in the 7th answer, described the confusion of the tongues as the deliberate breaking of a distributed cognitive network that pre-flood humans had operated across their entire species. He said that if the network ever reformed, in any medium, at any point in the intervening centuries, the Reformation itself would function as a signal to the Homeworld Council that the humans had begun to approach the pre-flood threshold. Look around you. In the last 3 decades, the human species has built a distributed cognitive network. It is not the same as the biological network the pre-flood humans had. It runs on silicon and copper and glass fiber rather than on shared language and telepathic bandwidth. But it is, in the functional sense, the tablet uses a reformation. Every human with access to the network can now, in principle, communicate in real time with every other human on the network. Ideas propagate across the entire species within hours. Coordination across geographical distance is possible at scales the pre-flood humans, in Enki's account, would have recognized. The collective mind, in the specific medium available to our era, is back. And the tablet said that when it came back, the signal would go out and the council would begin the process of convening. That is the first sign. And it is unambiguously active. There is no dispute about whether the digital network exists. There is no dispute about whether it functions as a real-time coordination layer across the species. The signal has been sent. The tablet said it would be sent. It has been. The second sign is the approach to the withheld knowledge. Enki, in the 5th answer, described a category of information he had explicitly refused to share. The withheld me, the knowledge whose possession by an unready species would immediately end the species. He did not name it, but he indicated that it concerned the deepest mechanisms of the world, and that the eventual encounter of the humans with this knowledge, if it happened before the humans were ready, would be the last encounter. Look at what our civilization has been doing for the last 100 years. We have been steadily approaching, in one domain after another, the exact kinds of deep mechanism knowledge Enki described. The physics of matter at its most fundamental level, the manipulation of the genetic code that governs biological form, the synthesis of intelligences that operate on principles the humans who built them do not fully understand, the tampering with atmospheric and geochemical systems on planetary scales. Each of these approaches is, on its own, a partial engagement with a piece of the withheld category, and the aggregate rate of approach, across all the domains simultaneously, is accelerating. Enki's warning was that the withheld knowledge, once encountered, would be the end. He did not specify which piece would be the fatal one. The concerning feature of our current situation is that we are, as a civilization, encountering multiple pieces at once, and any one of them could be the piece he was talking about, and we have no way of knowing in advance which. That is the second sign. And it is active. The third sign is the concentration of the caretakers. Enki, in the 6th and the 8th, and the 10th and the 11th answers, described in various forms the presence, on Earth, of non-human intelligences who had remained after the main Anuna withdrawal, and whose function was to monitor the human trajectory and, in some cases, to actively suppress human development that approached the threshold. He said that in every prior era, when human civilization had begun to approach any of the 7 orientations he described to Belshazzar, an active suppression had followed, and the suppression had been coordinated in ways that ordinary human politics could not explain. Look at the pattern of coordination in our own era. Not everything is coordinated. Most things are just human failure. But the specific set of activities that would, in the terms of the 11 answers, count as the humans moving toward the 7 orientations is being systematically opposed in patterns that recur across supposedly independent institutions, across nations that supposedly do not coordinate with each other, across ideological factions that supposedly disagree about everything else. The systematic opposition to the small group configuration, in favor of both mass populations and atomized individuals, in every developed society, is one visible pattern. The systematic opposition to honest investigation of the withheld categories, particularly the ones about consciousness and about what happens after death, in the mainstream intellectual institutions of the era, is another. The systematic opposition to the true origin story, in favor of either the flattened materialist origin story or the dogmatic religious origin story that both fail Enki's 4th orientation, is a third. These oppositions could be coincidence. In some cases, they are, but the aggregate pattern, when you look at it across the whole civilization, shows the specific concentrated character that Enki said would be the signature of hostile caretaker activity. The caretakers, in his account, are concentrating. That is the third sign, and it is active. The fourth sign is the loss of the memory. Enki, in the 2nd orientation of the 11th answer, said that the humans of the intervening centuries needed to carry the record forward in whatever medium was available in each generation, in enough copies and locations that no single event could erase all of them. The record was the 11 answers, and the surrounding tablets, and the broader body of what the humans knew about their own origin and their own trajectory. Look at what has happened to that record in our own century. The digital medium, which offers unprecedented copying and distribution capabilities, has simultaneously, in ways that were not obvious at first but are increasingly obvious now, produced unprecedented fragility. Records that exist only digitally can be edited without the editing being detectable. Records that exist only digitally can be deleted, across all locations simultaneously, by whoever controls the servers on which they are stored. Records that exist only digitally can be replaced with modified versions, and the modified versions can be presented as the original, and the humans who would notice the difference are, in each successive generation, fewer. Meanwhile, the older physical records, the tablets and the manuscripts, and the printed books that carried the memory across the pre-digital centuries are being either destroyed or centralized in institutions that can control access to them, or, in some particularly striking cases, quietly removed from public availability. The 11th answer's 2nd orientation, the distributed and unerasable preservation of the record, is precisely what our current arrangement is failing to provide. And the failure is not passive, the failure is being produced. That is the 4th sign. And it is active. 4 signs. Already active. All 4 of them consistent with the specific patterns Enki described. All 4 of them accelerating. And these are the ones that are clearly identifiable. There are others that may or may not be additional signs, depending on how the tablet's more ambiguous passages are read. The point is not that our species is definitely doomed. The point is that our species is, at this moment, in a condition that matches, more closely than any prior period of history, the condition Enki described as the pre-vote configuration. The vote may still go our way. The 7 orientations are still available to us. The record, though fragile, still exists. The small groups can still be formed. The investigation can still be conducted. The honest origin story can still be told. The caretakers can still be recognized and resisted. And the humans of the years remaining before the return can still, if enough of them choose to, become the humans who could carry the negotiation at the moment of the return itself. Nothing is finished. Nothing is determined. The vote is scheduled but not called. And we, in our own lives, in our own actions, in the small choices we make about what to read and who to talk to and what to build and what to remember, are participating in the trajectory that the Council will, when the moment comes, evaluate. Every choice matters, in the specific sense that Enki used the word. And every choice is available, right now, to you. So what do? What do the 11 answers, taken as a whole, tell you to do, in the specific circumstances of your own life, in this specific year, in this specific era of the human species? They tell you, in the 7 orientations, to do 7 things: ask the questions, preserve the record, build the small groups, tell the honest origin story, investigate the withheld categories, recognize and resist the hostile caretakers, prepare for the return. 7 things. Each of them is available to you. Each of them can be pursued at the scale of a single individual life, or at the scale of a family, or at the scale of a small community, or at whatever larger scales you find yourself able to work at. None of them requires you to be an emperor or a genius or a prophet. All of them require, only, that you take the 11 answers seriously enough to organize your own attention around them. That is the ask. That is what Enki, in the specific and difficult language of the 11th answer, was asking every human of every intervening generation to do. Take the answers seriously. Organize your attention. And, over the years remaining to you, become one of the humans who would, if the moment of the return arrives in your lifetime, be capable of standing in the meeting and speaking clearly to the ones who came back. The tablets, at the very end of Belshazzar's transcript, preserve a fragment that some scholars have read as a personal message from Enki to any human, in any future generation, who would eventually encounter the 11 answers in their consolidated form. The fragment is short, it is only a few lines, and its authenticity has been debated, because it appears in only one of the surviving copies, and the copy is late, and the passage may be an addition by a later scribe. But even if it is a later addition, it is worth reading, because it captures, in a way the more formal parts of the tablet do not, the personal quality of the being who gave the answers. The fragment reads, in the closest rendering the surviving Sumerian allows, as follows: to the one who reads this in the far time, I do not know if you exist. I hope you exist. If you exist, it means the record survived, and the surviving of the record was, for me, the last hope. I could not stay. I could not tell you everything I knew. I could not save all of you. What I could do, I did. I made you with the addition. I saved the thread. I gave the 5th teaching. I opposed the vote. I stayed as long as I was allowed. And when I left, I gave the last of you what I could give, which was the 7 orientations. If you have followed them, you are what I hoped you would become. If you have not followed them, you are what the Council will erase. Either way, you are mine. In the specific sense that the making was mine, and the responsibility for the making is mine. I did the work, and you are the work. And whatever you have done with yourselves, in the years between me and you, is what I have to answer for, on my own side of the accounting, when my own reckoning comes. So do well, please. If you can, do well. That is the only thing I still ask of you. Do well. That is the fragment. Whether it is authentic or not, it is what the record ends with. And it is, in the specific and difficult sense that the whole 11-answer document is our inheritance, from the being who made us. Delivered late, delivered in pieces, delivered against the active opposition of institutions that would have preferred we not receive it, but delivered. And what we do with it, from this moment forward, is what we do with it. There is no more record after the 11th answer. There is no 12th question. There is what Enki said, and there is what we, in the intervening years, decide to do about it. And the decision is, individually and collectively, ours. Ask the questions, preserve the record, build the small groups, tell the true story, investigate what was withheld, recognize and resist the ones who would suppress your movement toward the threshold, and prepare, in whatever way is possible in the specific years remaining to you, for the moment when the return arrives. Those are the instructions. That is the manual. That is what the being who made us wanted us to do. And whether we do it is, at this specific moment in our specific history, still an open question. The answer to that open question is what our generation, over the years remaining, will provide. And what we provide is what the council, when it convenes, will evaluate. And the evaluation is what will determine, one way or the other, whether the species that Enki made continues, or whether the species that Enki made, like the pre-flood humans before us, is erased and replaced with whatever the council decides to make next. The vote is scheduled, the record is in your hands. The time between now and then is what you have to work with. Use it well. That is what he was asking. That is what he is still asking, if the fragment at the end is authentic from wherever he now is. Use it well. There is one final thing to say before we close, and it is a thing that has come up implicitly in every one of the 11 answers, but that deserves to be said explicitly at the end. The being who made us, according to his own account, loved us. Not in the abstract sense that a distant God might be said to love a creation, in the specific and personal sense that a maker comes to love what the maker has made and cannot bring themselves to abandon it, even when the abandonment would be easier and safer and more politically survivable within the maker's own community. Enki loved us. He said so, in various ways, across all 11 answers. He said so, most clearly in the first answer, when he told Adapa that the addition to the modification had been his own personal gift, given so that some evening on a reed platform, one of us could sit next to him and ask why. He said so in the second answer, when he told Adapa that he had kept us even after the seal broke and death entered the bloodline. He said so in the third answer, when he told Ziusudra that he had opposed the flood and had saved the thread. He said so in the fourth answer, when he confessed to Ninliltuku that her family had died on his account. He said so in the fifth answer, when he gave Enmedaranki the teaching that his own council had opposed. He said so in the sixth answer, when he told Enhijuana why the other Anuna hated him and asked her to save the record. He said so in the seventh answer, when he described to Nabu the degradations his own kind had inflicted on us. He said so in the eighth answer, when he stayed longer than he was permitted in order to spend the last afternoon with the humans he had made. He said so in the ninth answer, when he responded to Ninshibur's premature use of the protocol because he understood why she had used it. He said so in the 10th answer, when he explained to Berossus why he had withheld what he had withheld. And he said so in the 11th answer, when he gave Belshazzar the 7 orientations, and when, if the fragment at the end is authentic, he added his final message to whoever would read the record in the far time. He loved us, he loves us, and what he wanted, more than anything else he wanted across the entire long project of our making, was for us to eventually become what he had hoped we might, when he first put his hands in the clay and added to us the possibility of asking why. That is the whole story. That is what the 11 questions and answers, taken together, add up to. A being made us, a being loved us, a being warned us, a being left us instructions, and a being is waiting, somewhere, to see what we do with the instructions. The waiting has been going on for 4,000 years. The waiting will continue for some further number of years, which no one knows for certain, but which is, in the accounting of the tablets, running out. Use the time. That is the last thing the record asks of you. Use it well. Before we bring the walk to its final close, we should sit for a moment with the material history of the record itself, because the story of how the 11 answers have reached us is, in its own way, one of the strangest chapters in the whole account. The tablets from which the 11 answers have been reconstructed do not exist as a single unified document in any single physical location. They exist as a scattered constellation of fragments, held in museums and university collections and private archives across at least 11 countries. The British Museum holds the largest single collection, approximately 3,000 tablet fragments from the Ashurbanipal Library that contain, in various stages of completeness, portions of the 11 answer material. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin holds a smaller but critically important collection, including the single most complete surviving copy of the seventh answer, the passage on the confusion of tongues, which was recovered from the German excavations at Ashur in the first decade of the 20th century. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad held, until the looting that followed the invasion of 2003, approximately 800 fragments that had been excavated in the Iraqi campaigns of the mid-20th century, of which roughly half have been recovered from the international antiquities market in the intervening years, and roughly half remain, at the time of this recording, unaccounted for. Beyond these institutional collections, there are the private holdings. Some are known, cataloged, and occasionally available to scholars on request. Others are known to exist but have not been publicly cataloged, either because the current owners prefer anonymity or because the provenance of the pieces would not survive close legal scrutiny. And some are, according to the informal knowledge of the scholarly community that studies this material, still in the ground, in specific locations that have been identified through the analysis of the surviving fragments but that have not been excavated, either because the political situation in the relevant regions has prevented excavation, or because the potential excavators have judged, correctly or not, that the material would be more useful undisturbed than in a museum vault where it could be, in the specific vocabulary the 10th answer uses, edited without the editing being detectable. The condition of the surviving fragments varies enormously. Some are in near-perfect condition, baked hard by the ancient library fires and preserved intact through the millennia. These can be read directly, with only the ordinary challenges of translating a difficult ancient language. Others are severely damaged, either by weather or by handling, or by the specific interventions that appear to have targeted certain passages across multiple copies simultaneously. The interventions are, in some cases, obvious. A specific line has been chipped away from every known copy of a particular tablet, in a pattern that could not be produced by ordinary wear. In other cases, the interventions are subtler. A line has been recut, apparently in antiquity, so that a critical word has been replaced with a different word that changes the meaning of the passage without leaving any physical trace of the alteration. In these subtler cases, the alterations have been detected only through cross-comparison with other copies, and only in a few instances have the original readings been recovered with any confidence. The transmission of the material through the modern period has followed the pattern that George Smith initiated in the 1870s. Each successive generation of scholars has produced its own contributions, some in mainstream publications and some in the specialized journals that have historically been more willing to publish the more difficult passages. The names of the 20th century contributors who did the most substantial work include, in addition to Reginald Campbell Thompson, the German scholars Erich Ebeling and Wolfram von Soden, the American Assyriologists Samuel Noah Kramer and William Hallow, and the smaller but persistent group of independent researchers, including Zachariah Sitchin, whose interpretations of the material fell outside the academic mainstream, but who nonetheless kept the general public informed about the existence of the 11 answer document during decades when the mainstream scholarship was mostly silent about it. The academic and the independent traditions have, throughout the 20th century and into our own, been in tension with one another, and each has accused the other of various forms of misreading. The academic tradition has accused the independent tradition of overinterpretation and speculative embellishment. The independent tradition has accused the academic tradition of underinterpretation and deliberate softening. Both accusations have, in specific instances, been justified. Neither tradition has produced, on its own, the complete picture the 11 answers describe. What has produced the picture, to the extent that it has been produced at all, is the slow accumulation of contributions from both traditions, filtered through the judgment of readers in each generation who have been willing to hold both traditions accountable to the underlying record. You are, right now, in the position that every reader of the 11 answers in every prior generation has been in. You have received a version of the record. You have been told, in the specific rendering this video has produced, what the 11 questions were and what the 11 answers said. You are entitled to be skeptical of the rendering. You are entitled to check it against other renderings. You are entitled to go to the sources, in whatever form they are available in your era, and to read them for yourself. The record does not require your acceptance. It requires, in the specific and difficult vocabulary of the second orientation, your remembering. What you do with it after you have remembered it is between you and the being who put your hands in the clay. But the remembering itself is what the record is asking of you, and the remembering is what will, in the aggregate across your entire generation, determine whether the record survives to the next generation, and to the generation after that, and eventually to the generation that will be present at the moment of the return. Your remembering, small as it may seem, is a link in that chain. The chain has held, so far, for 4,000 years. Whether it continues to hold depends on you and on whatever version of you the next reader after you turns out to be. There is one more thing to add, and it is a small thing but a necessary one. The 11 answers are, in the transmission we have received, in the order the tablets place them. First question about origin, second about death, third about the flood, fourth about the chosen survivor, fifth about fire and forbidden knowledge, sixth about the hostility of the other Anuna, seventh about the confusion of tongues, eighth about the departure, ninth about the return, 10th about what was hidden, 11th about what to do in the intervening centuries. That order is, according to the surviving colophons, not accidental. It is the order in which the questions were actually asked, across the 2,000 years of transmission from Adapa to Belshazzar. But the order is also, in the reading of some of the scholars who have worked most closely with the material, structurally meaningful in a way that goes beyond mere chronology. The 11 questions build. Each one presupposes the previous ones. Each one opens a door that the next one walks through. And the 11th, the final one, only makes sense once you have the first 10 in mind. If you tried to read the 11 answers in a different order, or if you tried to read the 11th answer in isolation from the 10 that precede it, the 7th orientation about preparing for the return would seem arbitrary, and the 3rd orientation about the small groups would seem eccentric, and the whole document would collapse into a set of unconnected recommendations. In the order the tablets give them, the 11 answers are a coherent whole. They are a briefing. They are, as we said at the very beginning of this walk, a document. And the document, properly read, in the order it was delivered, is what we have just walked through together over the 3 hours that this recording has now, at last, reached its end. Thank you for staying with it. The next time we return to this territory, we will walk into some of the specific side chambers the 11 answers reference, but do not fully enter. The names of the specific structures Enki mentioned, the specific locations of the withheld technology, the specific patterns by which the hostile caretakers have coordinated their activity across the modern centuries. Each of these is its own record, and each deserves its own walk. But the 11 questions and the 11 answers are the foundation. Everything else builds on them. And you now have the foundation. Carry it well, carry it forward, generation to generation, and carry it, above all, into the years remaining.